Chapter 4764. Huan was not stupid enough to go upstairs again. She stood on the stairs and coughed softly. Huan, what is your father doing? Huan swallowed her saliva. Daddy is making a cake. Huan bit her lower lip again. Did you say you wanted to eat it? No. Huan said innocently. Daddy said that Mommy wanted to eat it, so he made it. Huan bit her lip again and frowned. She wanted to say something but swallowed it back down. No matter what, she couldn't say anything in front of the children. After all, Enchanting was already a big boy and Xian was a sensitive child. Besides, the children really missed him these days. It was not a big deal for them to have a meal together. Huan thought about it and felt relieved. Or rather, she found a reason to convince herself. She was sitting on the sofa on the other side of the room. She was half lying on the sofa, watching Enchanting teach Xian mathematics lazily. Huan was beside her, watching lazily as well. Even their expressions were in sync. After Qian finished making the cake, he started to cook. There was a steamed fish, 2 stir-fried vegetables, and a stewed soup. It was nourishing and delicious. Huan couldn't help but swallow when she smelled the fragrance. Huan leaned over and said softly, "Mommy, you want to eat, don't you?" God knew how the 3 of them had been treated in the past month. Mommy wanted to be a good mother, but she really didn't need to cook to express her motherly love. Only big brother Enchanting could finish his mother's cooking without batting an eyelid. If she and Xian really couldn't eat anymore, Xian could still force himself to eat, but little Huan couldn't. Now that her father was back, Huan wouldn't let him go. She missed her father. She missed her father's cooking even more. After she said that, Huan roughly understood what she was thinking. She glanced at her and said, "Mommy's cooking is not good?" Huan smiled and said, "Mommy's cooking is already very delicious, but Daddy's is better." "Is it 1 point?" Huan asked her. Huan nodded vigorously. "Only one thing, but it's more important." Huan reached out and gently pinched her little face. "I can't raise you well." Huan's eyes widened. "Ingrate." She opened her eyes a little bit. "Mom, look, my eyes are black." Huan was speechless. After a while he sighed and said, "I think so." Huan was still smiling. "That's how it is." Huan hesitated for a moment. "Do you really want Dad to stay?" This time Huan did not speak for a long time. Huan did not speak either and only looked at her. After a long time, Huan murmured, "I miss Dad." Her little arms hugged Huan tightly as if she was afraid that she would not agree. Huan did not move. She sighed in her heart and was about to speak when Qian came to Huan's side. He said to Huan, "Dad has something to do recently, so he asked Mommy to take care of you. Okay?" After he said that, Huan immediately asked shrewdly, "How long will it take?" Qian thought for a moment and smiled. "About half a year. But Dad will come back to see you every week." After a long time, Huan asked again worriedly, "Dad, are you sure?" Qian nodded. "Of course." Huan howled and leaned on him again. Qian carried her to the dining room. "Let's eat." The 2 boys quickly followed, but Huan was still in a daze for a long time. Chapter 4765. Huan didn't say a word while Qian was talking. She was just a little surprised. She was surprised that Qian didn't say that he would stay. He wasn't. Her eyes couldn't help but fall on his face, and she didn't move for a long time. Qian seemed to notice her gaze and looked in her direction. When his eyes met Huan's, he smiled faintly. Only then did Huan remember that he didn't bring his luggage with him, and he didn't even have anything upstairs. He went to the guest room to take a shower, which Qian didn't do in the past. There was a trace of uncertainty in Huan's eyes. Qian was still looking at her quietly. After a while, he smiled. "Huan, do you have a problem? Do you not want me to come and see the children, or do you want me to stay?" Huan snorted coldly. "You can come and go as you please. No one is stopping you." Qian glanced at her and cut a small piece of cake for Huan and Xian. Then he smiled again. "You sound like you said it out of anger." He Huan gritted her teeth. I didn't say it out of anger. Qin Mo raised his eyebrows. Really? That's good. There was always a hint of provocation in his gaze when he looked at her. He Huan was so angry that she gritted her teeth. Did he come back this time to deliberately make her angry? He Huan bit her lower lip and decided to ignore him. Anyway, he was so bad. While they were arguing, the two boys didn't say a word and buried their heads in the cake. Enchanting didn't usually eat sweet things like cake. In order to diffuse the subtle atmosphere, he ate 2 small pieces in a row. Of course, he fed a part of it to Yi Huan. Little Yi Huan was satisfied. She wiped her mouth. Daddy, Mommy, you will affect our healthy growth. How is Yi Huan unhealthy? Qin Mo was amused. Then, because he hadn't seen his little girl for a long time, he held Yi Huan on his lap during the meal. He lowered his head and pressed it against the little girl's hair, smelling the pleasant smell that belonged to a child. Yi Huan also missed her father, so she reached out and hugged Qin Mo. Yi Huan was eating. The food was delicious, and the scene in front of her was heartwarming. However, she had a very strange feeling. She couldn't tell what it was, so she continued to eat. When she was almost full, she realized that this strange feeling was called emptiness. It seemed like Qin Mo's return this time had nothing to do with her. He came back to see the child. Everything that happened in the kitchen was just a small tease. He didn't really miss her. Yi Huan was a little embarrassed. After the meal, she found an excuse to go upstairs. Qin Mo was hanging out with the children downstairs. He looked up and saw that Yi Huan's footsteps were a little heavy. She seemed to be a little angry. Angry. The corner of Qin Mo's mouth curled up slightly. Qin Xian leaned against him and talked to him. His small, slender, fragile, and unbelievably beautiful. Qin Mo simply grabbed his own knee. This child was too delicate and sensitive. Ai Jia had done so much, but Qin Mo didn't know how to explain it to Qin Xian. Perhaps he would tell Qin Xian when he grew up, but not now. This was too cruel for Qin Xian now. Qin Xian was very small, but he was very sensitive. However, after living with Qin Mo for so long, he trusted Qin Mo and Yi Huan. It wasn't that he didn't have any feelings for Ai Jia, but he was too young to change anything. Chapter 4766. Qin Xian was young but sensitive. However, after living with Qin Mo for so long, he trusted Qin Mo and Yi Huan. It was not that he had no feelings for Ai Jia, but that he was too young to change anything. Since then, Qin Xian had never mentioned Ai Jia. When Qin Xian was 18 years old, he had asked about Ai Jia's whereabouts once. Qin Mo told him, but he did not tell him the cruel truth. When Qin Xian was 20, he asked Qin Mo again. This time, Qin Mo told him. Later, Qin Xian went abroad for 4 years. The day before he returned, he went to see Ai Jia. At that time, Qin Xian was no longer that fragile boy. He had grown into a young man like Qin Lu. He was handsome and had a trace of Ai Jia's gentleness. That was 14 years later. Ai Jia looked at her son quietly. She suddenly felt relieved of the anger she had been holding for so many years. She had done so much, but she had let Qin Xian down the most. At this time, Qin Xian was a 10-year-old boy. He had no parents. He only had Qin Mo and Yi Huan. He was worried about Ai Jia's whereabouts and the relationship between Qin Mo and Yi Huan. He was afraid that his arrival would break up their relationship. There were many times when he thought of leaving, but he left without saying a word. However, Enchanting patted his shoulder and told him that his uncle would come back. Yi Huan also laughed and said that he was thinking too much. Qin Xian did not understand why they were so sure. His uncle had not been home for a long time. Were kids nowadays not afraid of breaking up their families? Breaking up their families? Qin Yi Huan opened her eyes wide. Dad loves Mom so much. He can't bear to break up. She patted Qin Xian's shoulder again. Men in their 40s are all so slippery and pretentious. Qin Xian's eyes widened. Greasy. Uncle Qin has nothing to do with this, right? Who said that? At this moment, Qin Mo was done with the children and started to walk upstairs. He still had something to talk to Yi Huan about. Yi Huan was lying on the sofa playing with her phone. When she heard the door open, she immediately sat up. She stopped playing and looked at him warily. Chin Mo, what are you doing here? Chin Mo smiled faintly. You seem to be afraid of me? He looked around and then sat opposite her. The sofa sank because of his weight, and Huan just stared at him. Chin Mo's hand was on the sofa. He looked at her expression and said with amusement, I remember that we are still legally married. Why are you so guarded against me? You're not a little girl anymore. Huan bit her lip. Chin Mo, what are you trying to say? Qin Chan said that Qin Xian can be operated on. Chin Mo suddenly said in a serious tone. Huan was stunned. Then she said in a low voice, he can be operated on? Chin Mo nodded. Yes, he will be hospitalized the day after tomorrow. Huan couldn't believe it. He would be hospitalized the day after tomorrow. And she didn't know if Qin Xian was afraid. Chin Mo probably knew what she was thinking. He said calmly, Qin Xian is a boy. Huan bit her lip. But he is still a child. He is only 10 years old. Chin Mo was still calm. No one can replace him. What I want to say is that Qin Xian will be hospitalized for about a month. I will take care of him during this month. He probably knew what Huan wanted to say, so he quickly continued as if he had thought about it a long time ago. Chapter 4767. He probably knew what Huan wanted to say, so he quickly said, I know you want to take care of him personally. Huan, what I want to say is that taking care of a patient is not easy. You know Qin Xian's situation. You will stay here to take care of Huan and Shinting. They need the care of elders. After Qin Xian is discharged, I will send him to the sanatorium for a year. He said it emotionlessly and quickly. Huan stared at him for a while before murmuring, You've thought about it, haven't you? Chin Mo, what have you been doing for the past month? What have you been thinking? Chin Mo's tone was indifferent. I thought you wouldn't be interested. Huan bit her lip and didn't say anything. Chin Mo smiled. You're not going to say anything? Huan lowered her head. You've already thought about it. What's the difference if I say anything? Are you angry again? Chin Mo suddenly sat beside her. Huan's pupils shrank. She moved to the side and bit her lip. Chin Mo, why are you sitting here? Chin Mo suddenly said, Do you know why I arranged for Qin Xian to go to the sanatorium? Huan pursed her lips and shook her head. Chin Mo paused. Rong Yu is very insistent. He wants to take care of Qin Xian. He's probably afraid that AI Meng Meng will be lonely. After all, they don't have a child. Huan blurted out, But he's Qin Lu's child. Seeing that she was tricked, Chin Mo coughed. Yeah, why are you taking care of Qin Lu's child? Shouldn't he be in the Qin family? Huan realized that she had been tricked. She glared at him for a while and snorted. Let Qin Xian decide for himself. Chin Mo smiled but didn't say anything. Huan waited for a long time, but Chin Mo didn't speak, so she bit her lip and stammered, Chin Mo, say something. Say what? He smiled again and reached out to touch her little chin. Shouldn't you be the one saying it? For example, asking me to stay or something. Huan turned her head away, trying to avoid his touch, but Chin Mo had a way of catching her. He pinched her chin and made her look at him. After he was done talking business, he began to tease her again. You really don't miss me at all? It's been a month, Mrs. Qin, right? As he spoke, he leaned over and kissed her. Huan was stunned. After a while, she touched her lips with her finger and murmured, Chin Mo, good night kiss. Chin Mo chuckled and stood up. I'm going back. Ah! Huan exclaimed again. Only then did she notice that he had changed into his previous clothes. Was he really going back? He didn't want to stay, nor did he want to stay. She didn't know whether she was more shocked or more disappointed. It had been more than a month, and she knew about what had happened to Aijia. There were several times when she wanted to call Chin Mo, but she held back. He was back, but it wasn't the way she wanted him to be. Huan wanted to throw away her pride and throw herself into his arms, but her pride didn't allow her to do so, so she looked a little awkward. Chin Mo stood and looked at her condescendingly. After a while, he said, You were much cuter when you lost your memory. Ihuan glared at him. Qin Mo just smiled and left. He really left. Ihuan sat on the sofa and thought a little pretentiously. She clenched her fists and bit her lips, feeling a little uneasy. That night, Ihuan had a dream. She dreamt that she received Qin Mo's divorce agreement. There were a lot of things on it, and in the end it was about the distribution of the children. She was assigned to Qin Xian. Chapter 4768. 69 books, right? That night, Ihuan had a dream. She dreamt that she received Qin Mo's divorce agreement. There were many items on the agreement, and in the end it was about the distribution of the children. She was assigned to Qin Xian. Little Qin Xian carried a school bag and followed her. Later, Ihuan woke up. When she woke up, it was still dark. She slept alone on the big bed. Qin Mo was not there. Yes, he had gone back a long time ago. Ihuan did not know where he was staying, but secretary he had vaguely mentioned that he was staying in a hotel. Not in their previous apartment, but in a hotel. Ihuan thought that maybe he really wanted to divorce her. Divorce, let's just divorce. She was not begging him. However, since he was not in the mood to come back, why did he tease her? In the middle of the night, Ihuan scratched her head with a headache. She felt that Qin Mo was really too hateful. The next day, Xinting and Ihuan went to school, leaving Qin Xian and her at home. Ihuan did not sleep well. Her eyes were all bruised. Qin Xian was very considerate and did not wake her up. At 10 o'clock, he said that he wanted to go back to sleep, so Ihuan slept with him. For the first time, Qin Xian and Ihuan fell asleep on the sofa together. When they woke up, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. When Ihuan woke up, she held a warm little body in her arms. There was an indescribable feeling in her heart. She thought of the dream. In the dream, little Qin Xian carried a little school bag and followed behind her. Then she remembered that he was going to be admitted to the hospital tomorrow. They would not be able to see each other for a week after the operation. After that, he would stay in the sanatorium for a year. It was so long that they would not be able to see each other. Ihuan was a little reluctant. She kissed the little boy. Qin Xian, are you afraid? Qin Xian had just woken up. There was a touch of red on his usually pale face, which was very good-looking. He was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted. He shook his head at first, then changed his mind and nodded. Of course they were afraid. Not to mention children, even adults were afraid. Ihuan felt sorry for him. She touched his face and said gently, Auntie Qin Chun is here. Don't be afraid. Qin Xian pursed her lips and nodded vigorously. Ihuan patted Momo's head lovingly and smiled faintly. Qin Xian seemed to have thought of something. Auntie, can I hug you? Of course. As soon as Ihuan finished speaking, the small person had already hugged her tightly. Although the person looked small and skinny, he was shockingly strong. Ihuan was in pain, but she still hugged him to comfort him. Little Qin Xian lay in her arms for a long time before a muffled voice came out. Auntie, can I call you Mummy? Ihuan was stunned. Although Qin Xian looked sensitive and slender, he was a proud little guy. While she was hesitating, Qin Xian had already called out softly, Mummy. His voice was very soft and sounded like a whimper. Suddenly, Ihuan understood. This child probably knew that he would never have a mother, but he didn't know how to express it. Ihuan's heart ached to the extreme. She couldn't describe her feelings. She had always thought that Ai Jia deserved it. After all, she had done so many bad things. No punishment was too much. But now that Qin Xian had lost his mother forever, she felt guilty. This child who called her Mummy was indirectly sent to prison by her. She heard that she would never get out. Ihuan wanted to say something, but she didn't know where to start. Chapter 4769. At this moment, Ihuan made a decision. Just like in her dream, she would take care of Qin Xian. He would call her Mom. After a long time, Ihuan said softly, Get up and eat. It's afternoon. Actually, there was an auntie at home who cooked, but Ihuan cooked a bowl of noodles for Qin Xian. Her noodles were good, and Qin Xian enjoyed it, but Ihuan really didn't think it was that delicious. She smiled and said, Slow down. No one is competing with you. Qin Xian finished the last poached egg and took a breath. Today is my birthday. He Huan held her chin and said, then I'll have to think of a gift for you. Qin Xian's little face was abnormally red. I called you Mom. He Huan said, ah, and then came back to her senses. She really couldn't believe that Qin Xian had chosen her. While she was still in shock, Qin Xian said again, will you accompany me to the hospital tomorrow? He Huan looked at him. Qin Xian licked his lower lip and said again, I want Mom to accompany me. He Huan's feelings were very complicated at this time. She hugged Qin Xian and kissed him, saying in a low voice, I'll take you out to eat cake later. In fact, Qin Xian's body was not very suitable for going out, but He Huan wanted to take him out now. Every child had a wish, which was to eat cake with their parents on their birthday. Qin Xian was no exception, although he had never said or mentioned it. After He Huan said that, Qin Xian opened his eyes wide. He was a little hesitant and yearning. Can I really? If I say you can, then you can. He Huan snorted and raised her voice slightly. Go upstairs and change. Qin Xian immediately abandoned his hesitation and changed his expression to one of yearning. Half an hour later, the two of them set off. Not only did they eat cake, but they also went to the amusement park. Although the weather in early spring was sunny, it was still a little cold. Qin Xian wore a lot of clothes and a mask to prevent people from getting infected. He Huan also made sure that Qin Xian didn't play anything too intense and only played with kids. Even so, Qin Xian was already very satisfied. However, after returning to a shopping mall in the city center, He Huan wanted to buy a gift for Qin Xian. Children always like toys, although Qin Xian had never asked for it. He Huan had thought about it. She couldn't control Shinting's way of education. Qin Mo had high hopes for Shinting, but she was in charge of Qin Xian. She wanted Qin Xian to be happy. With that thought in mind, He Huan let loose a little. At this time, the reporters stopped her. She didn't know what was going on. She and Qin Xian both wore masks and kept a low profile. However, it was obvious that the reporters were very excited. Director I heard that you and President Qin have separated. Your movie's box office is approaching 4 billion yuan. Did you neglect your marriage because you were too focused on your career? Did President Qin cheat on you? Cheat on me? He Huan didn't know where this news came from. She glanced at the reporters and didn't want to talk to them. However, the reporters obviously didn't want to let her go. They chased after her again. Don't you know that President Qin had dinner with a socialite 3 times a month? Or is this marriage only in name, and you and President Qin are doing things on your own? He Huan protected Qin Xian in front of her and said coldly, you can ask President Qin about this. Being in the entertainment industry, she knew better than anyone else. They didn't dare to ask Qin Mo about this kind of topic. They just had to pick the weak ones. Chapter 4770. Memorize. He Huan didn't finish her sentence. She pushed past the reporters and walked into the mall. But no matter where she went, there were people following her, and the number of reporters was increasing. Qin Xian was a little uneasy beside her. He tugged at the corner of her shirt and called out softly, Mama! At this moment, the sharp-eared reporters heard it and immediately let their imaginations run wild. They played their own games. They even dared to write that He Huan had an illegitimate child. But this child was older than Qin Yi Huan. How could there be an illegitimate child? In the end, He Huan was finally blocked and couldn't move. And the reporters had to ask her how she felt. Of course, He Huan wouldn't say it. But after being stuck for so long, she was also a little angry. She directly called Qin Mo's cell phone and said, I'll get President Qin to come over and explain things to you. President Qin was a man that the reporters couldn't afford to offend. But the reporters were unwilling to give up the famous scene of a man and a woman in the same picture, so none of them left. When Qin Mo rushed over, he had a rather good-looking woman with him. She was the manager of the public relations department. Other than that, there was also Secretary He and a large group of King Entertainment's security personnel. King Entertainment's security personnel were all tall and strong. There were at least 20 of them. Qin Mo's expression was very ugly, especially when he saw Qin Xian, who was wearing a mask and holding Huan in one hand, being squeezed by the crowd to the point that he was almost out of shape. Huan herself was not any better. He was really angry. When Qin Mo came over, the reporters seemed to have lost their tongues. They all kept quiet and focused on taking pictures. They even took pictures of the female lead of the scandal and Qin Mo together. Oh yes, there was also the illegitimate child. These pictures could be written with exaggeration. Qin Mo's expression became even uglier. He walked straight in front of Huan. She had always been willful and mischievous, never taking his words to heart. However, he had always given her face in front of others and would only punish her in private. Therefore, only Huan knew about Qin Mo's viciousness. But this time, Qin Mo didn't give her any face at all. He said coldly, Huan, there's a limit to your nonsense. I told you yesterday that Qin Xian will be hospitalized tomorrow. It's not like you don't know that it's not suitable for him to appear in a crowd. He'll get infected, and once he gets infected, he might have to stay in the hospital for a week. Plus, he needs surgery. AI Mingming's body is suitable for donation now. I don't know when the next time will be. Huan actually knew, but she had a sense of propriety when she brought Qin Xian to play. It wasn't her wish to be blocked by these reporters. She also didn't expect that he would blame her without apologizing, even though it was clearly caused by his scandal. Moreover, this was the first time he had acted so shamelessly in public. Huan replied coldly, Yeah, I was just messing around. But if I didn't come out, I wouldn't have known. I was too focused on work, and President Qin is having a date with someone else. Qin Mo was annoyed. What date? Huan ignored him and carried Qin Xian, wanting to leave since the reporters had already dispersed. But her body wasn't in good shape either. She only managed to walk a few steps before her body tilted and she fell. Qin Mo caught her immediately. When Huan woke up, the sky was already dark. She opened her eyes slowly and saw a white wall in front of her. There was a faint smell of medicine in the air. Why was she in the hospital? A few seconds later, she recalled the argument with Qin Mo and Qin Xian's birthday. Just as she was about to sit up, a voice came from beside her. You still have to run because your blood sugar is too low. Not to mention, Huan is carrying Qin Xian. Huan, you're not a 3-year-old anymore. Chapter 4771. Huan was just about to sit up when a voice came from beside her. Your blood sugar is too low and you still want to run. What's more, you brought Qin Xian with you. Huan, you're not a 3-year-old anymore. The voice was a little harsh, reminding Huan of Qin Mo in the past. Qin Mo was in his 20s. Qin Mo was so bossy and annoying. She propped herself up and tilted her head slightly to look at Qin Mo. Qin Mo was looking at her too. He sat on the sofa beside the bed with a gloomy expression and a cold voice. Congratulations. Qin Xian was infected successfully. He's in quarantine now. On his birthday, the day before his surgery. Huan was stunned for a moment before she mumbled. He was wearing a mask. If masks are all-purpose, we wouldn't need so many doctors. Qin Mo said bluntly. Huan bit her lip and didn't say anything. Qin Mo didn't seem to want to talk to her. He simply told her that Qin Xian wouldn't be returning to the villa after his surgery and that she needed to stay in the hospital for observation. If there were no problems, she could be discharged the next morning. His attitude was a little cold and angry. He wasn't heartless, but it definitely wasn't the way he treated his wife. Huan was stunned for a moment before she looked down and said in a low voice, Qin Mo, I want to see Qin Xian. He's in quarantine. If you want to see him, you can only see him through the glass. Qin Mo sounded a little annoyed. Huan looked at him. Today is Qin Xian's birthday. I just want him to be happy. Qin Mo stared at her for a while. She didn't know if he understood her explanation or if he didn't want to hear it at all. He was still very cold. Auntie Lan will bring you food later. Rest early after you finish eating. After saying that, Qin Mo looked like he was going to leave. Huan suddenly stopped him. Qin Mo paused and tilted his head. Anything else? Huan didn't know what she wanted to say. After a long time, she murmured, Are we going to get a divorce? Under the light, Qin Mo's eyes were as black as ink. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "What about you?" It was another sentence without any rhyme or reason. Like him, He Huan did not answer his question. Before Qin Mo walked out, he heard her murmur, "Maybe I'm really focused on work." Therefore, she was not suitable to be his wife. After so many years, they had always quarreled. Now that there was nothing to quarrel about, they still hadn't reconciled and were still proud of themselves. Qin Mo turned his head away. He Huan stared at him. There was a trace of confusion in her eyes, as if she was looking forward to something that had been dashed. Qin Mo was indeed quite annoyed, but at this moment, he felt a certain sadness in his heart. He had always been the one walking towards her. Whether it was 100 steps, 1,000 steps, or 10,000 steps, he had never hesitated. And after listening to the boring topics of the reporters, she had questioned him. He thought that yesterday at the villa, he had made it very obvious that he was waiting for her. But it was obvious that He Huan had pushed him away again. Qin Mo knew that he was being a little unreasonable, but he didn't want to reconcile with her now. He didn't want to coax her, and he didn't want to reunite with her. If they reconciled, they would be reunited, and there would be no restraints. Maybe she would fly away again just like before. Qin Mo narrowed his eyes, clenched his fists, and suddenly closed the door. He Huan bit her lip and threw a pillow at the door. Just then, Qin Chun came over. Chapter 4772. He Huan bit her lip and threw a pillow at the door just as Qin Chun came over. She caught the pillow easily and smiled. "Did you two fight again?" He Huan still felt guilty in front of the doctor. After all, she was the one who brought Qin Shen out and got infected, so she wasn't as arrogant as before when she saw Qin Chun. Qin Chen had always liked He Huan. She was so nice, living like a woman. She was a princess at home and a famous director when she was out. He wondered if there were any actresses. Yeah. Qin Chun put the pillow down and put his hands in his pockets, looking very handsome. He looked at He Huan and asked the nurse to put the dinner down. "Auntie Lan brought it here. I told her to go back." "Oh yeah, Mom is worried about you and Qin Shen." He Huan couldn't help looking up at the mention of this. "Mom, is it my fault?" "Of course it's your fault." Qin Chun smiled and comforted her. "Actually, Mom and I can understand you. After all, Qin Shen isn't your biological son, and he's related to the Qin family by blood. Moreover, he's Aijia's child, so it's reasonable for you to dote on him. As for my second brother, I don't think he's mad at you because of Qin Shen's infection. At least, it's not just about that." After Qin Chun said this, He Huan was a little stunned. After a while, she said in a low voice, "It's not." Qin Chun held back his laughter. "At least, I don't think it's just that. At least, it's not what he's most angry about. He Huan, you're actually very smart. Why can't you understand this?" It must have been hard on her second brother. It wasn't easy for him to watch over her for so many years. The Qin family seemed to be the type of people who were loyal to one person to the end, just like their old mother. Thinking about it, it seemed that she was the only one who had changed her liking. The person she used to like was called Rong Lei. She had liked him for many years until Lan Yu appeared. Well, until now. Qin Chun also felt quite friendly when he saw people in a vegetative state. Although it was not good for a doctor to have some bad taste, Qin Chun still felt that it was a very good thing to use a needle to wake up a person who was sleeping very soundly. It was very good. Especially after waking up, the feeling of calling her a quack while in pain was even better. Qin Chun reminisced about how Lan Yu was not as cute as she used to be. He thought about how interesting it was to treat her as a man and how hesitant she was in the past. Qin Chun sank into the memories of the past. He Huan looked at her and asked, "Qin Chun, what are you thinking about?" Qin Chun just smiled and said, "Oh, nothing. Hurry up and eat. If not, I'll feed you." She especially liked to tease He Huan, so she really fed her. He Huan really refused, but Qin Chun really insisted. So, when Qin Mo turned around, he saw He Huan seducing his second sister-in-law's younger sister, brother. Qin Chun put down the bowl with a fake smile and said, "Second brother? Why don't you do it?" Qin Mo glared at her and closed the door. Qin Chun waved his hand and said, "He's jealous." He Huan let out an ah, and after a long time, she bit her lips and said, "Really?" Qin Chun smiled and said, "I say, second sister-in-law, can't you feel whether second brother is jealous or not? You two have been together for so long. It seems like you two have been together since young. Can't you guess what he is thinking?" Sigh. Didn't they say that an old couple would feel that the other party's hand belongs to them? Why did he Huan not understand Qin Mo at all? Wasn't Qin Mo being unreasonable now? He had been a bootlicker for so long. Wasn't he just being unreasonable and coaxing a little? I will update tomorrow. Chapter 4773. Memorize. After Qin Chun finished speaking, He Huan remained unmoved. Now she was angry. With Qin Mo's attitude, even if she tried to get close to him, she would just be giving him the cold shoulder. Why bother? However, He Huan really wanted to see Qin Xian. She was indeed worried and felt guilty. Thinking of this, He Huan couldn't eat anymore. She lifted the quilt and said, "I want to see Qin Xian." Qin Chun stopped her with one hand. "Qin Xian is fine. Eat your food, or I won't be able to explain it to Qin Mo. Qin Mo." He Huan was stunned for a moment. He was so fierce to her. Would he care about whether she had enough to eat or not? After a brief trance, she came back to her senses and looked at Qin Chun. Qin Chun just smiled and coaxed her second sister-in-law. "All right, I'll go with you when you've finished eating." Her words were more effective than Qin Mo's. He Huan finished the soup Auntie Lan brought. After the bowl was empty, she looked at Qin Chun and asked, "Is it okay now?" Qin Chun put away the things and teased, "Look at you. Qin Xian seems to be closer to you than his biological son." Actually, she could understand. He Huan might be a little casual, but she was never one to meddle in other people's business. To be able to take Qin Xian with her in such a situation meant that she really treated him as her own. It was impossible for Qin Mo not to know about this. The reason why he was so angry was because of something else. After Qin Chen finished speaking, He Huan looked at her and murmured after a while, "He called me Mom." Qin Chun shook his head. Everything has its vanquisher. In the past, He Huan had been so cold-hearted. Yi Huan had been abandoned in B City for many years, and He Huan had been alone abroad. Now that it was Qin Xian who called her Mom, she couldn't stand it anymore. In any case, Qin Chun took He Huan to the special observation room. Since she couldn't enter, He Huan could only watch through the glass. Qin Xian was asleep, but there was an abnormal redness on his face. He Huan felt sorry for him. She put her hands flat on the glass and stared at it for a while before asking in a low voice, "Does he have a fever?" Qin Chun didn't hide it from her. "It's just a mild fever, so you have to be careful. Don't worry. I'll stay in the office for the next few days." He Huan felt guilty and guilty. "Qin Chun," she said. "Qin Xian's surname is also Qin, isn't it?" Qin Chun said carelessly. Suddenly, he said, "By the way, Qin Mo will also stay in the hospital to accompany him. He Huan, he should have told you about the nursing home in a year. At that time, Qin Xian will be alone. He can only visit him occasionally. This is Qin Mo's arrangement." Perhaps it was to make Qin Xian forget something. Time was the best medicine for healing. He Huan heard what she said, but she didn't answer. She just looked at Qin Xian quietly. At this moment, there was only Qin Xian. Everything else seemed to be blurred and unimportant. As for He Huan, she couldn't tell if she regretted taking him out. It seemed like she regretted it a lot, but it also seemed like she didn't regret it anymore. Because on his birthday, Qin Xian looked very satisfied when he heard about the cake. After a long time, He Huan's voice was very soft. "He will be fine, right?" Qin Chen smiled faintly. "I promise." The days after flew by. He Huan was discharged from the hospital, but she would come to the hospital to visit Qin Xian every day. Although they could only see each other through the glass, she saw him getting better day by day. Qin Mo didn't go back. She occasionally saw Qin Mo in the hospital. Secretary He accidentally mentioned that President Qin had booked a VIP ward in Xingyuan Hospital and was staying there for a long time. He Huan didn't pay him any special visits. Chapter 4774. When they occasionally met, they would only exchange a few words, that was all. Huan couldn't understand Qinmo's thoughts, but she didn't ask. She lived with Shinting and Huan just like that. With Shinting's company, Huan wasn't lonely. She seemed content to call Qinmo every night. Shinting went to King Entertainment twice a week, sometimes with Huan. Hence, Huan was the one who interacted with Qinmo the least. Slowly, she became a stranger. Huan couldn't even remember when she had thrown herself into his arms. She had also slowly forgotten his warmth and scent. There was also gossip about him and the public relations manager, or perhaps a minor celebrity under his banner in the tabloid magazines. King Entertainment had never done any internal PR, so news of their divorce was everywhere. On the contrary, the parties involved were very calm. Huan thought to herself, they're living separately. At least it's not as simple as a Cold War. She didn't have the face to ask him, and she couldn't bring herself to do it. A month later, Qin Xian underwent surgery and was sent to the rehab home. The little guy's body slowly recovered, and he often sent postcards to Huan. When Huan received the 28th postcard, the maple leaf was already red. She sat quietly on a bench in the courtyard of the villa, a book in her hand. In the past 6 months, Qinmo almost never came back, and she didn't look for him. Their interactions became fewer and fewer, except for when Huan received a sum of about 500 million yuan from Twin. She called Secretary He, and Secretary He transferred the call to Qinmo. She thanked him, and he said, "You're welcome." When did they become so distant? The call had to be transferred, and she had to say thanks for the slightest thing. After that, there was no after. It was already autumn. In the afternoon, Huan sat in the courtyard reading. The book in her hand had already turned many pages. Qin Xian's 28 postcards were neatly packed in a small box. There were 52 of them. Qin Xian should be back soon. Huan flipped through the pages one by one and put down her hands. Her eyes were a little sore. He looked at the time and realized that he had been sitting there for almost 2 hours. It had been half a year, and her health had improved a lot. She had never thought of becoming a big director again. It was a good idea to raise 2 kids like this. She thought that since Qinmo hadn't come back for so long, his intentions should be very obvious. He wanted to divorce her, but he just didn't want to bring it up first. Huan looked up at the afternoon sun. It was a little dazzling and her eyes were sore. She covered her eyes with her hands. After a while, she gently put her hands down, picked up her phone, and opened WeChat. She typed word by word in the chat box. "Qinmo, let's get a divorce." After she finished writing, she tossed her phone aside and stopped looking at it. After reading for a while, she went back to take a nap. When she woke up, she suddenly remembered the message from before. She took a look and saw that Qinmo had not replied. Huan couldn't figure out what he meant. They had clearly only seen each other once or twice in half a year. He probably had no intention of continuing this marriage. Huan sighed. She put her phone on the bedside table and got up to take a shower. However, when she came back from the shower, she found another person in the master bedroom, sitting against the headboard, and beside her pillow was a rather thick document. Huan lowered her eyes and pulled the overly thin bathrobe around her. If she had known that he would come back, she would never have worn this. Chapter 4775. There are no pop-ups and it's free. Qinmo's gaze fell on her, and his eyes seemed to be darker than usual. Huan's voice was a little low. "I'll go change. There's no need." Qinmo's eyes were faintly burning as he stared at her. Huan felt even more uneasy. She bit her lip and insisted, "I'll still." "I said no need." Qinmo's voice was a little low, and he sounded a little domineering. "Come here." Huan didn't understand. In her heart, he had come back to get her to sign the divorce agreement. It was the same when they divorced last time, a thick stack of documents. She suddenly felt a little angry. Since he wanted her to sign it, why did he come back? Wouldn't it be better and more direct to get the lawyer to come over? Therefore, when he asked her to come over, she refused to listen and took a step back. Qin Mo's dark eyes were still locked on her. Didn't you say you wanted a divorce? I came back with the documents. Why don't you dare to look at them? He knew He Huan's character very well. With such a provocation, He Huan fell for it. She bit her lip, glared at him for a while, and then snorted. Why don't I dare to look at them? As she said that, she went to the other side of the bed and took the documents. She had only read a few words when her wrist was caught. He Huan looked up and couldn't look away. She murmured, "It's not a divorce agreement." Of course not. It was a contract that forbade divorce for life. No one else could make a thick stack of documents like Qin Mo. He Huan struggled a little as he held her hand. Let go of me. The location was too dangerous. Qin Mo stared at her. I'm not letting go. He Huan closed her eyes slightly. Qin Mo, you jerk. You're the jerk. He pinched her chin and easily restrained her. Do you know why I didn't come back? He Huan didn't say anything. She was a little stubborn. Qin Mo's fingers were a little slow, but his voice was even more languid and hoarse. On the day you were hospitalized, Qin-chan said that we should sleep in separate beds for a while. He didn't finish his sentence because He Huan could guess that she was struggling again. She could roughly guess why Qin Mo had come back this time. She had just had a physical examination and everything was normal. However, no matter how much she struggled, she still couldn't break free from him. The children were not there, so Qin Mo seemed to be able to do whatever he wanted. When night fell, the villa was still quiet. Not even the lights were turned on. He Huan slowly opened her eyes. Her surroundings were dark, and she felt a warm breath on the side of her neck. She knew that Qin Mo was still around, so she buried her face into the pillow. Where are Enchanting and Yi Huan? Qin Mo's voice seemed to carry a hint of a smile. I asked him to bring Yi Huan to the Chiu courtyard for a night. Yi Huan was speechless. For her, he actually asked Enchanting and Yi Huan to stay out. He was shameless, but she still wanted to. Yi Huan was angry. On the other hand, there was no one else at home, so she stayed in bed and didn't want to get up. Qin Mo knew what she was thinking and teased her. Didn't you want me to come back? Why are you unhappy now that I'm back? Yi Huan turned around and turned her back to him. I didn't want you to come back. Like that. He was too shameless. Qin Mo laughed again. So you want me to come back and divorce you, huh? Yi Huan turned her head again and glared at him. Divorce then. Qin Mo smiled. After what happened just now, how could I bear to? Chapter 4776. Yi Huan was exasperated. He was really shameless. Qin Mo smiled again, holding her shoulders and pulling her into his embrace. Did you miss me? No, not any sweet words, but it was so sweet that it couldn't be dissolved. Yi Huan didn't say anything, burying her face in his embrace, absorbing the warmth from his body. She thought about what he had said to her back then, about how he had ignored her for half a year and how he had blamed her. She felt a little wronged. She didn't say anything, nor did she hug him, merely leaning into his embrace gently. After a while, Qin Mo's bathrobe was wet, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He lowered his head. Why are you crying? Are you too happy? You don't have to cry because your husband dumped you? Yi Huan glared at him. I'm not. Qin Mo smiled again, not teasing her anymore. He kissed her and got off the bed. I'm going to cook. I'm hungry. Yi Huan frowned and sat up. At that moment, Qin Mo turned on the light and she immediately hid under the blanket. Qin Mo smiled, picking up his clothes and putting them on nonchalantly. He went downstairs. Yi Huan was lying on the bed alone, feeling a little bored, so she picked up a document to read. The more she read, the uglier her face became. Qin Mo definitely didn't type every word. It must have been done by the secretary. She didn't even need to think to know that it was Secretary He. She wanted to kill him right now. It was too embarrassing. Yi Huan got up, put on a shirt and went to the study. She shredded the shameful document with a paper shredder and went back to the bedroom. She couldn't sleep anymore and looked at the time. It was already 9 at night. She had slept for about 4 hours. Unable to sleep, She got up and went downstairs to find Chin Mo. She had something to ask him. For example, his amorous affair. But when she went downstairs, she saw Chin Mo cooking for her in the kitchen. He was wearing a gray sweater and black trousers, looking tall and elegant. But this person had put down everything just to come back and cook for her. Chin Mo seemed to have noticed her. He gave her an apple and said, "Eat this to fill your stomach. Dinner will be ready soon. Let's have Thai food tonight. I'm brewing the soup for the winter skill." Huan took a bite of the apple. She wanted to go back to the living room to watch TV, but for some reason, she stayed. It had been half a year since they had been together like this. He asked her if she missed him, but she didn't say. She must have missed him. She couldn't see him. She said the divorce, ignoring the pain in her heart. She made herself think that she didn't care and didn't care. Huan bit the apple and looked at him. Suddenly, she said, "Let's bring Qin Xian back. I heard that Ai Meng Meng is pregnant. We are more suitable to take care of Qin Xian." Qin Mo nodded and grunted in acknowledgement. She didn't expect him to agree so easily. She was a little happy and took another bite of the apple. "Then, bring Shinting and Huan back tomorrow. We can't keep troubling the elders." Qin Mo agreed again, but after a pause, he turned his head and asked her, "Huan, don't you have anything else to say to me?" Huan asked, "What are you talking about?" Qin Mo coughed. "What about me?" Huan took another bite of the apple. "Aren't you staying here? Do I need to ask?" "Stay here?" Qin Mo really wanted to hear her beg him one more time, begging him not to let go and not to go. Chapter 4777. No matter how slow Huan was, she could probably guess what Qin Mo was thinking. She continued to nibble on the apple while looking at Qin Mo. Qin Mo was quite direct. "Am I staying here? You didn't beg me, huh?" His metaphor made Huan's face feel like it was burning. It turned red and hot. He was really too shameless. "Who begged you?" Huan's voice was mixed with the sound of her nibbling on the apple. She muttered, "You're the shameless one. That depends on whether you like it or not." "Huh?" Qin Mo seemed to chuckle softly. Then he turned his head and continued cooking. Since it was for the two of them, he made 3 dishes and a dessert. Moreover, it was the refreshing kind. Huan bit her lower lip. She wanted to say something but swallowed it. When a man and a woman discussed this kind of thing, the woman would always be at a disadvantage because she could never be as thick-skinned as a man. She sat there quietly, and Qin Mo quickly finished cooking. There was also a dessert. As soon as he placed it on the table, Huan wanted to eat it, but Qin Mo gently patted her on the back. He disapprovingly said, "I've only eaten 1 apple. This is for after dinner." He used quite a bit of force. The back of Huan's hand actually turned red. However, she didn't get angry. Instead, she seemed to be very happy. She also felt that this happiness was very strange. After being hit, her little temper flared up. She wanted to eat even more. She was certain that he wouldn't hit her again. Qin Mo looked at Huan, who was engrossed in eating. She looked more and more like Huan. He sighed. He reached out and gently rubbed her hair. "Look at you. You have no self-discipline at all." "What self-discipline?" Huan looked up and blinked. "I'm working so hard. Can't I eat more?" Qin Mo smiled. "Is it hard to take care of 2 children? Or is it because I'm back that you feel tired?" He asked seriously. If Huan didn't understand him, she would have been tricked by him and answered him seriously. But she knew him so well that she wouldn't be fooled. Qin Mo brought the dishes over and opened a bottle of red wine. Huan looked up at him again. "Little B, isn't it?" He smiled. Huan scooped another mouthful of dessert into her mouth and said slowly, "It's been half a year. President Qin thinks this is just a short separation." Qin Mo gracefully grabbed 2 goblets and poured them for himself and her respectively. As he gracefully made the gesture, he chuckled. "It sounds like you are as lonely and tormented as I am." Huan called him shameless again. But no matter how she called him shameless, Huan couldn't refuse the current Qin Mo. Whether it was a reunion after a long separation or a new marriage, She didn't know if her body could drink red wine, but it shouldn't be a problem if Chin Mo asked her to drink it. She picked up the goblet and took a sip. After drinking, she looked up and saw his eyes fall on her face. She couldn't help asking him softly, Are you working hard too? Chin Mo smiled. It's not bad. It's much better than those years. At least when you are in B City, I can see you whenever I want. For example, I can always see you from afar when I park my car in a specific place early in the morning. Or when you ask my mother out for tea, I can also see. He Huan didn't let him continue. Chin Mo, are you saying these words to please me and make me feel guilty so that I can't bear to drive you away? Chapter 4778. He Huan didn't allow him to continue. Chin Mo, are you trying to please me and make me feel guilty so that I won't be able to drive you away? Chin Mo's eyes deepened and his voice became gentler. He chuckled. It's obvious, isn't it? They were eating, but neither of them was in the mood to talk all the time. Some were good, some were bad, some were scolding, and some were trying to please him. In short, the meal lasted for more than 2 hours. They didn't look like an old couple at all. After the meal, Chin Mo packed up his things. He Huan went upstairs to watch TV. She had slept for several hours and wasn't sleepy at all. Her health had improved a lot in the past 6 months. Chin Mo went upstairs. He wasn't interested in the idol drama she was watching, but he still sat beside her and read a business magazine casually. After a while, he flipped it to the cover and found that it was a monthly issue. Chin Mo smiled and glanced at He Huan. He Huan was changing the channel. Her voice was quite impolite. Why are you looking at me? Chin Mo smiled slightly. Why haven't you stopped this? Do you like it? It's too troublesome. He Huan sounded very impatient, but the more she acted like this, the more certain Chin Mo was that she was actually waiting for him. Divorce? Breaking up? It was clearly a child's tantrum. Chin Mo suddenly put down the magazine in his hand and reached out to carry his little fellow over, placing her on his lap. He Huan immediately stuttered and bit her lip. Chin Mo, what are you doing? Chin Mo kissed her and said in a hoarse voice, It's getting late. Go to sleep. She was afraid that he would really carry her back to the room, so she hurriedly said, I'm not sleepy. Chin Mo raised his hand to look at the time and then said very slowly, It's almost 12 o'clock. It's not a good habit to stay up late. He really carried her back to the room. He Huan hammered her several times, but to no avail. She was put under the quilt and bit her lip. I said I don't want to sleep yet. Chin Mo leaned against the headboard, took out his phone, and finished the last bit of work. He said with a faint smile, Mrs. Chin, don't overthink it. We've been married for so long, we should be asleep at this time. He Huan glared at him. In her innumerable memories, he had always lied with that smile. But not this time. He really felt that she should sleep. Her body had just recovered a little, and he wouldn't let her be weak again, even if it would be very hard. Chin Mo closed his eyes, reached out his hand, and interlocked his fingers with hers. This was also a very intimate gesture. He Huan couldn't fall asleep. He wanted to talk to her so that she would feel sleepy. He Huan, he called her. In the darkness, He Huan's voice sounded a little muffled. You don't seem too happy that I'm back? His voice was amused. He Huan's voice was dragged out. Really? Chin Mo's smile deepened. You're obviously not happy. Did I make you unhappy? Or did I make you unhappy? This isn't a repetition. It's 2 meanings. Chinese is broad and profound. He Huan was silent for a long time. Finally, she couldn't bear it anymore and said, How about I go set off firecrackers now? That way, will President Chin be a little happier? Oh, that's not the way to make me happy. You can think about whether there's a better way that doesn't involve so many people and doesn't alarm others. It's a gentler way. Chin Mo seemed to be in a good mood. Chapter 4779. He Huan only felt that he was boring. Everything about being cold and aloof was fake. He was just shameless. But if she were to ask herself if she was happy, she wouldn't be able to lie to herself. There were only two outcomes to her phone call today. Chin Mo would either come back and divorce her as she wished, or they would continue to be an old married couple like this. He still seemed to dote on her a lot. If she had to choose between these two outcomes, which one would she choose? Without a doubt, it would be the current situation. How could she have the face to say that she wasn't happy? But she wasn't willing to say it out loud. Huan harumphed lightly and didn't say anything. But in the end, she still placed her little face gently on his shoulder. Chin Mo smiled and asked gently, "Actually, you missed me too, didn't you?" Huan didn't say anything. Not only did she bury her face in his shoulder, but she also hugged his waist gently. She didn't say anything and just hugged him. After a while, he felt the bathrobe on his shoulder getting a little wet. That was when he realized that she was crying. Chin Mo's heart softened. "Why are you crying? Didn't I come back?" Huan's fingers clenched into a fist and she punched his chest. "Chin Mo, you're too despicable." Chin Mo laughed silently. "Yes, I'm despicable. But big director, you still fell because of me, didn't you?" Huan punched him again angrily and indignantly. She said in a muffled voice, "Don't call me big director anymore. Not going out anymore? Not going to be a director anymore? Isn't that your dream?" Chin Mo admitted that he was being a little mean. He shouldn't have provoked her again. However, her reaction was unexpected. She didn't hit him, nor did she cry. She just obediently stayed in his arms. Her small and soft body was warm. Chin Mo waited for a while and couldn't help but lower his head to look. Huan was lying on his chest. Her eyelashes were drooping, and she seemed to be asleep. The bedroom was very dark and he couldn't see her clearly. He only felt that she was very, very obedient. Even the two small hands that were placed flat on his chest were also obedient. His heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. He finally lowered his head and kissed her. "If you don't want to answer, then don't." However, as soon as he finished speaking, she said, "I won't go out anymore." "Huh?" Chin Mo was a little surprised. Huan said softly, "I want to be the mother of Huan, Qin Xian, and Shen Ting. Then Chin Mo held back his laughter. "I'll be the children's father." Huan hugged him with her little paws again and stopped talking. Thus, Chin Mo knew that the thing he had been waiting for many years had finally arrived. She said that she would not run away and would stay. He had chased after it for many years, obtained it, lost it, and now he had it back. Finally, he slowly fell asleep as he spoke. When he woke up again, it was a new day. Early in the morning, when Huan woke up, there was warmth beside her. However, Chin Mo wasn't beside her. She was stunned for a moment. As if uncertain, she moved her body to the side and finally laid down on the spot where Chin Mo slept. It was very warm. He should have just woken up. Huan bit her lip and her face was a little hot. There was a chuckle at the door. "Congratulations, Mrs. Chin. You have a husband again." Huan felt that he was really shameless. Chapter 4780. A light chuckle came from the door. "Congratulations, Mrs. Chin. You have a husband again." She snorted. "Should I congratulate you as well? That's great." He came over and sat on the bed. "Get up. Let's go pick up Qin Xian first. We'll go to Chiu Garden together later. Shen Ting and Huan don't have school today." Huan scratched her hair worriedly. "Is Qin Xian okay?" "He's alive and kicking. What are you worried about?" He tugged her hair out of habit. "Do you not trust me or Qin Xian?" Speaking of this, Chin Mo asked unhappily, "Why are you women so obsessed with Qin Xian?" Listen to her. It was true that Qin Xian was handsome, more handsome than most men, and even more handsome than the men in the Qin family. But she was a woman. After he asked the question, Huan stared at him with a strange look in her eyes. Then, she said slowly, "Because Qin Xian is amazing. It's normal for him to be rich, but not everyone can be the best surgeon in the world." Chin Mo was speechless. "Just because of this?" Huan smiled and added, "Because Qin Xian understands women. After saying these warm words, she lifted the blanket and entered the bathroom. She slammed the door shut and locked it from the inside. You know there's something wrong with what you said. Qin Mo sighed. Then he thought about it and his face turned pale. He thought about all the scenes of Qin feeding his wife. Even though he knew he shouldn't, he couldn't help but say, seducing second sister-in-law. So, during the Qin family's reunion that night, Qin felt cold. After a long time, she realized that it was her second brother who had done this to her. Qin felt that she was wronged. She didn't do anything. Qin Mo withdrew his gaze with satisfaction. He decided to stop sponsoring this guy who seduced his second sister-in-law. He drank such expensive coffee and cultivated his temperament to seduce his second sister-in-law. However, Qin was not afraid at all. Second brother always had something to ask of her. Huan knew nothing about this. Her attention was entirely on Qin Xian. Qin Xian looked fine. Not only was his body healthy, but he also seemed to be mentally unscathed. He did not ask about Aijia's whereabouts and seemed to treat this place as his home. Huan was quite happy, but she also knew that Qin Xian's body still had to be taken good care of. After all, he was extremely delicate. If he was in danger again, she really didn't know what would happen. That night, Qin Mo drove home with his wife and child. Just like before, each of them did their own duties and did not say much. It was as if they were born to be like this. It was as if Qin Xian had stayed there for half a year and nothing else had changed. Late at night, Qin Mo returned to the bedroom. Huan also accompanied Huan before returning. The two of them bumped into each other at the bedroom door. Qin Mo rubbed his forehead. Are you tired? Huan also rubbed her forehead. A little. Qin Mo put his fingers on her shoulders. Let me massage for you. Huan raised her eyes and looked at him. We are an old couple. Isn't it normal? He smiled slightly. Huan sat on the sofa and let him stand behind her and massage her shoulders. Suddenly, she thought of something. She slightly opened her eyes. Qin Mo, do you want another child? And could she give birth to a child? Last night, he didn't. Huan couldn't say those words, but she knew that he understood what she was saying. Chapter 4781. As Huan said this, Qin Mo smiled slightly. After a while, he said, Qin said it's okay. Huan was stunned. After a while, she shook her head. Qin Mo, you didn't even ask me if I wanted to have children. She was already 33 years old, and Qin Mo was already 40 years old this year. They already had 3 children, so she really didn't want to have children. But Qin Mo seemed to want children. He didn't ask her last night. Huan was a little annoyed. She stared at Qin Mo and Qin Mo chuckled. He pinched her little face. Let nature take its course. Yeah, if you can't get pregnant in 2 years, then we won't. When Huan was 35 years old, it was indeed not suitable for her to have children. 3 children then, so be it. Actually, Huan was thinking about something else. She was thinking about Ting most of the time. Qin Xian had shares left behind by Qin Lu, so he didn't have to worry for the rest of his life. And Ting was being groomed as the successor of King Entertainment. If she got pregnant, it would be fine if it was a girl. If it was a boy, then Ting. Looking at her expression, Qin Mo guessed what she was thinking. He smiled. I believe that King Entertainment will be more than just King Entertainment in the future. So Huan, what you're worried about won't happen. You have to believe in Ting or me, yeah? Huan stared at him for a long time before nodding hesitantly. Although Qin Mo said let nature take its course, Huan felt that he was obsessed with having a child. Huan couldn't help but protest. One night, she pushed Qin Mo away for a kiss. Huan frowned. Qin Mo, don't you think you're being too stubborn? Qin Mo leaned back and crossed his arms in front of him. He smiled. Really? I thought I was stubborn about you. Never. Not a child. Huan couldn't help but say, if you do this, I'll want to be a director again. I'll go to Africa and stay there for half a year. Then what about me? President Qin was very good at saying sweet nothings. His face didn't blush, and his heart didn't beat fast. Huan looked at him strangely, then said very slowly, "You're at home looking after the kids? You must be very busy with 3 kids." He couldn't go on business trips, couldn't eat out, and couldn't have any messy women. President Qin stroked his good-looking chin and nodded in agreement. "I don't think it's a bad idea for you to go out, but you should have a baby. I'll be busier this way, and you'll be more at ease outside, right?" Huan blushed and bit her lip. "It's been a year. Qin Mo, you still haven't given up?" She accidentally touched Qin Mo's sore spot. He had been working hard for a year, but Huan still hadn't gotten pregnant. Although she didn't say anything, the suspicion in her eyes made President Qin feel embarrassed. Even if he couldn't get pregnant, he still wanted to prove that he was a man. But as a man, he still cared about it. At midnight, Qin Mo tilted his head and looked at his little wife in the crook of his arm. Huan was sleeping soundly. Over the past year, her body had been getting better and better. She was almost as lively as before. Qin Mo's eyes darkened and he wanted to smoke. Of course, he wouldn't smoke there. He thought about it and carefully retracted his arm, placing Huan's little head on the pillow. Chapter 4782. He went to the study room and closed the door gently. Sitting behind the desk, he lit a cigarette and smoked slowly. He was somewhat satisfied, but also a little upset. Actually, it was not that he had to have a child. Getting Huan pregnant was more of a way to prove himself. President Qin rarely felt a sense of failure. That was the case now. It had been a year and he couldn't get his wife pregnant. Although Qin Chun said that Huan would have to depend on luck to get pregnant, Qin Mo thought, 365 days a year. Is there something wrong with me? He fell into self-doubt. He smoked slowly and thought about it. He stayed in the study for about 2 hours before returning to the bedroom. Huan knew nothing. Once she entered the door, Huan woke up. Qin Mo was still there. However, she smelled a faint smell of tobacco. Huan's fingers touched the pillow lightly and then slowly climbed up Qin Mo's shoulder. "Did you smoke?" Qin Mo smiled and pulled her over to kiss her. "I couldn't sleep last night, so I smoked a few." Huan leaned over and sniffed. She raised her little face. "It doesn't look like a few." Qin Mo's smile deepened. "You've learned." Huan laughed softly and didn't say anything. She still put her little hand on his shoulder and asked after a while, "Are you busy today?" "Not bad, I can get off work on time." "Why, is there anything special today?" He pinched her little face. "Or do you have a surprise for me?" "No surprise, no joy." Huan thought for a while. "Does your birthday count?" Qin Mo was quite surprised. Another year had passed. "I'll make a cake. I'll pick up the child and get off work early." Huan's fingers tugged at his collar. Qin Mo closed his eyes and then opened them a little to look at her. "The cake you made." Huan didn't need to say anything else. Huan snorted. "You're looking down on me. Other than being a little ugly, it's edible everywhere. I can eat it." He smiled and gave up the idea of making it himself. In the end, they would have to do it again and Huan would ask for it. Now that their lives had returned to peace, other than joking about work, Huan was actually very at home at ease. She was the one who worried about the 3 children, and Qin Mo did not stop her. Huan always had things to do at home, but she only worried about what she should worry about and cared about the children's daily life. As for schoolwork or other aspects of Shinting's life, Huan did not ask. Their marriage and life had reached a very perfect balance. Qin Mo was very satisfied with this kind of life, except for the fact that he couldn't have children. Although it was her birthday and he had promised her to go back early, he still made an appointment with Qin Chun that afternoon for a checkup. After the examination, Qin Mo was naturally normal. Qin Chun patted his brother on the shoulder. "Now you can rest assured." Qin Mo took the report and read it over and over again. Then he coughed lightly. "Then why didn't your sister-in-law and I have children?" Qin Chun couldn't help but roll his eyes. Then he looked at his second brother as if he was looking at an idiot. "Qin Mo, I've said it 800 times. You have to control yourself. You have to control yourself when you have children. You're not a hothead. You can't have children like this. She added, second sister-in-law will be very happy. Chapter 4783. Qin Mo glared at her. It's my birthday today. Qin Chen smiled. This report is the best gift I can give you. Qin Mo. However, he still took the report and drove home. When he got into the car, he looked at his watch. It was already 6:30. He said he would be home at 5:30. On his phone, there were 5 missed calls from He Huan. Of course, He Huan also called Secretary He. Secretary He said that President Qin had left a long time ago. Qin Mo called back. He Huan picked up. Qin Mo, I'll be back in a while. He explained. I was held up by something. He Huan said, did you go to the hospital? Qin Mo's tongue flickered. After a while, he asked, did Qin Chun tell you? No, I guessed. He Huan smiled. You couldn't sleep last night, right? I guessed it must be because of something. Qin Mo held the phone and didn't know what to say. His voice was hoarse and gentle. Let's talk when I come back. Of course, the couple couldn't discuss such a problem immediately after they got home. They celebrated their birthdays first. Enchanting prepared gifts for the children. Of course, Enchanting was the most generous. He bought a seaside villa in a nearby city for Qin Mo. Qin Mo was very satisfied. Qin Xian and Yi Huan's gifts were all handmade. The difference in craftsmanship was also like heaven and earth. When Qin Mo saw Qin Xian's handmade gifts, he was also surprised. It was a model airplane completely handmade. It was about 2 meters long, and its style and function were very realistic. Moreover, it wasn't available on the market. Qin Mo was surprised. He Huan looked at him with a little pride. Suddenly, Qin Mo was touched. He Huan really taught Qin Xian well. She wouldn't teach Qin Xian, but she would play with Qin Xian. She had always been supportive of Qin Xian's hobbies. There was even a room in the house dedicated to Qin Xian. It was filled with wood, steel, and all kinds of tools. Maybe Qin Xian was a little genius. It was really surprising that a 10-year-old could make something like this. After the celebration, Enchanting took Yi Huan to do her homework. Qin Xian went to his tool room. Qin Mo accompanied him for a while, feeling proud and amazed. Back in the bedroom, Yi Huan sat on the sofa and looked at the airplane. Qin Xian said that it can fly at night. Do you want to try it? Qin Mo rubbed his forehead. Although it was a little childish, he really wanted to know how good this airplane was. They carried it to the balcony together. Qin Mo looked at the manual again, and the more he read, the more surprised he was. Even the muscles on his face were trembling. He looked up at He Huan and said in a low voice, this little guy is really a genius. The 2-meter airplane with the number 5 written on its body glided across the night sky. Its whole body lit up, and it flew very steadily. The most amazing thing was that after pressing the start button, the airplane didn't need to be controlled at all. The internal system could detect everything. Qin Mo only tested the airplane for half an hour before he was called back. His face was a little solemn, and it was hard to tell what he was feeling. A week later, Qin Xian was sent to a certain university to study in the Department of Aeronautics. 2 months later, he was sent to a certain research institute to borrow him. Half a year later, in short, Qin Xian was very busy. He traveled around the country again and again. When he was 20, he was sent to America, the land where Aijia lived. At this time, Qin Xian was already the founder of an airline company. He received a lot of orders from all over the world. However, the most classic model was still the number 5 model. That was his home. 5 people. In short, Qin Xian was very busy. He traveled around the country, and when he was 20, he was sent to America, where Aijia was. At this time, Qin Xian was already the founder of an airline company. He received a lot of orders from all over the world. However, the most classic model was still the number 5 model. That was his home. 5 people. However, he never mentioned it and no one asked about it. But everyone knew about it. Another 8 years passed. This year, Enchanting was 31 years old, and he was the vice president of the Qin family's King Group. Qin Yi Huan was 25 years old, and she was the head of King Entertainment. Yi Xiangnan was also 31 years old, and he was also the president of Stars Entertainment. Originally, Qin Xian founded American Airlines. However, after the second round of financing, it was incorporated into the King Group. However, American Airlines was still controlled by Qin Xian. On one hand, Enchanting was busy, and on the other hand, he needed Qin Xian to share the burden. Although Qin Xian was not very fond of management, he only liked to study new things. After so many years, many things had happened. The three children of the Qin family no longer lived together. It was rare for them to go back to their parents' house for a weekend gathering. Of course, Enchanting still lived in the villa with Qin Mo and Yi Huan. This was very surprising because, in theory, Qin Yi Huan was also living in the Qin family. However, Enchanting did not move out, so it was not appropriate for Qin Yi Huan to live here. It was another weekend. In the office of the vice president of the King Group, Secretary Wang knocked on the door politely. President Shen, Mr. Qin called. He said that young President Qin came back from abroad today. He asked if you would like to get off work early and have dinner together. Enchanting was usually a little busy. The number of times he could come home for dinner in a week could be counted on one hand. In total, it would not exceed 1 or 2 times. Therefore, if there was anything special, Qin Mo would specially call to ask. Qin Mo did not ask much. He stayed at home with his wife, drinking tea and shopping. Although he had the title of president, most of the things were handled by Enchanting. This could be considered as fulfilling the original promise. Enchanting was originally reading the documents. The tip of his pen paused. Tell him that I might not be able to come back early today. Secretary Wang agreed. Enchanting said again, I'll call Qin Xian later. Secretary Wang was considered a trusted aide, so he directly called Qin Xian's name in front of her. Although Qin Xian had grown up, Enchanting still loved him very much. However, when a man grew up, he would not show it so obviously. Secretary Wang nodded. She wanted to leave, but Enchanting stopped her again. President Shen, is there anything else? Secretary Wang smiled. As a secretary, the first thing she should do was not be annoyed. She always had to smile and act appropriately. Enchanting hesitated for a moment before asking softly, Did Mr. Qin say if she would come back? Secretary Wang understood who this she was. Other than Qin Yi Huan, there was no one else. So, Secretary Wang quickly replied, Miss Qin is already at the Qin mansion. I heard that she flew back with little President Qin. Flew together? The pen in Enchanting's hand paused for a moment before he said in a low voice, I understand. You can leave first. Secretary Wang was a little hesitant. Then should I still return as before? Yes. Tell Uncle Qin that I have something to deal with. Enchanting's voice was still calm, but as a trusted aide, Secretary Wang could still hear a slight difference. If only little President Qin came back, President Shen might really not be free. However, Qin Yi Huan also went back. President Shen would probably not be free even if he was free. Chapter 4784. Updated quickly. Actually, after so many years, Secretary Wang didn't know what had happened back then that caused the relationship between Mr. Shen and Yi Huan to become so stiff. They used to be very close, and Yi Huan had been raised by Mr. Shen for a few years. How could this intimacy disappear just like that? If a girl threw a tantrum, it was obvious that Mr. Shen wasn't an emotional person. But who could say for sure? This was a matter of feelings. The only thing that could be confirmed was that Yi Huan was with Yi Xianan from the Yi family, and Xiao Shen was having an ambiguous relationship with Bai Anan from the Yi family, Yi Mulan family. Bai Anan was a lawyer, a very capable lawyer. She and Xiao Shen were quite compatible. But this ambiguity was something that everyone knew and understood. But there was no proof. There was nothing that could be done. The younger generation didn't admit it, so they just let the gossip and didn't deny it. Secretary Wang retracted his thoughts and nodded. Yes, Mr. Shen. I understand. This time she really closed the door. Enchanting was originally buried in work, but now he raised his head. He was slightly distracted for a while, and then continued to bury himself in work. At 9 o'clock at night, he raised his hand to look at the time. He felt that it was about time, so he packed up the documents on the table, got up, and went out. Unexpectedly, he saw Secretary Wang at the door. Ting was stunned. "Why didn't you get off work?" Secretary Wang couldn't say that she didn't dare to get off work before her boss did. It wasn't like this had never happened in the past, or rather, it had been like this for about 6 or 7 years. Since then, Mr. Shen and Yi Huan had been estranged. They always avoided each other, stayed behind to work overtime, and refused to eat. So, Secretary Wang didn't dare to knock until now. Ting glanced at her and said calmly as he walked, "You don't have to wait for me in the future." Secretary Wang held the elevator door for him, thought for a moment, and said boldly, "What's the situation? Other than Mr. Shen?" There were times when he worked overtime every month, and it was normal for Mr. Shen to work overtime when he was very busy. Her question was simply outrageous. Other than Secretary Wang, no one else would dare to ask. Ting stood in the elevator and frowned. He said slowly, "If you still need to ask me such a question, you don't need to be the chief secretary anymore." Secretary Wang coughed lightly and said, "Yes, Xiao Shin, I won't ask you again." Ting didn't look at her anymore. As soon as the elevator door opened, he went out first. Secretary Wang followed him attentively and dutifully opened the car door for his boss. Ting got into the car. He didn't start the car immediately. The car window was also lowered. He gave Secretary Wang some simple instructions, and Secretary Wang nodded from time to time. Then he buckled his seatbelt, started the car, and left. About half an hour later, the car slid into the gate of the Qin family's villa. The lights in the villa were all turned on as the car slid in. It was as bright as day. Ting circled around and finally parked the car in front of the villa. He opened the car door and alighted from the car. A servant from the house came forward. "Eldest young master, young miss and young master have returned." Ting stopped in his tracks and raised his hand to look at his watch. He asked casually, "They haven't gone back yet?" His younger brother and sister didn't live here. Usually, they would have left by this time. They would have left after dinner at about 8 o'clock. But it was already past 10 now. Chapter 4785. The servant smiled. "Sir, you asked them to stay for a while longer." Ting didn't go in immediately. Instead, he lit a cigarette and asked, "Why isn't there a car?" The servant replied, "The chauffeur went to pick them up. Young master and young miss didn't drive." Ting didn't go in immediately. Instead, he lit a cigarette and asked, "Why isn't there a car?" Ting didn't have anything else to ask, but he still finished a cigarette outside. Then, he flicked off the ash and strode into the villa. Ting didn't have anything else to ask, but he still finished the cigarette outside. Then, he flicked the ash and strode into the villa. Under the dim yellow light, Qin Mo and Yi Huan sat in their usual seats. Yi Huan held a dessert in her hand but didn't eat much. After all, she was getting older and less passionate about these things. However, Yi Huan still looked young. Qin Xian and Yi Huan sat on the sofa opposite them. They were 2 to 3 years apart and were related by blood. Therefore, they looked like siblings and had inherited the good looks of the Qin family. They were exquisite. Ting's footsteps paused for a moment, his gaze indifferently landing on Qin Xian and Qin Yi Huan's faces. After a while, he indifferently shifted his gaze away, as though those few seconds did not exist. What couldn't be ignored was that Yi Huan only had shoulder-length hair. It was black and straight. She would be beautiful if she kept it long. However, it had been 6 to 7 years and she had kept it that long. During important banquets, Qin Yi Huan would usually comb her hair to the back. She liked white dresses or suits. How to put it, she was the upgraded version of Qin too. There were many small-time stars in King Entertainment who misunderstood young President Qin's sexual orientation and knocked on young President Qin's door fearlessly in the middle of the night. Of course, they were all chased out by Qin Yi Huan in the end. She didn't like women. Uncle, auntie. Ting smiled and sat down on the sofa. Then he looked at Qin Xian and Yi Huan. Qin Xian greeted him first. Ting smiled faintly, while Yi Huan lazily called him brother. Ting's eyes dimmed a little. He just nodded and started to talk about business with Qin Mo and Qin Xian. Although the current King Corporation held an important position in the entertainment industry, it was only the tip of the iceberg within the corporation. Yi Huan felt a toothache as she listened. She picked up her phone and leaned against the sofa to play games. In this aspect, she was quite like Yi Huan. However, many of the ways she handled things were more like Qin Mo. It was just that with Ting and Qin Xian around, she didn't feel so repressed and usually did as she pleased. At this time, she was wearing a loose gray sweater and a pair of jeans, which were tucked into black boots, making her legs look long and straight. Her coat was also casually thrown to the side, as if she didn't care about it. When Ting was talking about work, his gaze would occasionally fall on her for a while, but he would quickly shift his gaze away. Qin Xian had been with them for so many years. How could he not see through it? The corners of his mouth curled up slightly and he didn't say anything. Meanwhile, his father, Qin Mo, felt a toothache. He hadn't expected the situation to turn out like this. In the past, he had thought that even if Ting and Yi Huan weren't together, they would still be very close siblings. In the past few years, they were really very close. Why did things change on Yi Huan's 18th birthday? To put it mildly, they were like strangers. After that, Ting worked hard and Yi Huan went abroad for a few years. 2 years ago, she came back to take over King Entertainment. 2 years had passed, but the two children were still like this. How could their parents not worry? Moreover, Yi Huan and Yi Xianan didn't have any lightning or fire between them. What was the problem? Chapter 4786. Qin Mo couldn't figure it out. He had asked Ting and Yi Huan separately, but neither of them said anything. Qin Mo couldn't do anything about it, but the children were all grown up, especially when it came to emotional matters. How could an old father and mother manage them? Qin Mo thought about it and decided to let it go. He did not ask about it and let them be. After chatting for about half an hour, Qin Xian stretched. Yi Huan, are you going back? Qin Yi Huan was taken aback. Of course. Qin Xian blinked. I'm not going back today. There's a morning meeting at the headquarters tomorrow. I'll go with brother Ting. Yi Huan said oh and took her coat. I'll go back then. Oh, brother Ting said he would send you. The driver has already gotten off work. Qin Xian's handsome face had an imperceptible smile. Yi Huan frowned and followed Qin Xian's gaze. Ting was drinking tea. He rarely drank coffee and liked good tea. In the Qin family, he and Qin Chen's aunt got along very well. One liked coffee and the other liked tea. They were both very extravagant in this aspect. However, he could afford to be extravagant. Right now, Ting's personal wealth was over 100 billion yuan, and he was in charge of almost all the power in the Qin family. It would be a piece of cake for him to change the dynasty one day. Qin Yi Huan thought absent-mindedly. Ting obviously agreed. Qin Xian's words were not false. He put down the cup in his hand, but when he put it down, he gently stroked the rim of the cup with his good-looking fingers. He was already very good-looking. Every inch of his body was just right, showing off his masculine beauty. This kind of good-looking appearance was different from Qin Xian's exquisite handsomeness. Ting's good looks were not aggressive, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. However, in recent years, his methods were not so pleasant. Compared to Ting, the feminine-looking Qin Xian was much more innocent. Ting had a nickname in the business world, Smiling Tiger. Although it wasn't very pleasant, it accurately explained why Ting was feared by the seniors. There was another saying that Ting was a loyal dog raised by Qin Mo. When he grew up, he would be released to bite people. Ting didn't care, but Qin Mo straightforwardly gave Ting 20% of the shares in the newly established King Corporation. This was definitely the treatment of a biological son. Qin Xian only had 10%, and Qin Yi Huan only had 10%. King Group, Qin family, there was no need to say who was in charge and who had the final say in the future. Hence, in the end, There was only one version, Enchanting, the smiling tiger. And at this time, this smiling tiger's finger left the cup, extremely indifferently said, "Let's go." Qin Huan took her coat. "I'll drive myself. There's no need to trouble you." Enchanting didn't mind, or it could be said that he didn't care about what she said. She had already done such a thing, so there was nothing she wouldn't dare to do or say. He walked out. His slender figure was hidden in the darkness, but his voice could be heard. "You don't seem to be jet-lagged." Huan harumphed, then looked at Qin Xian and spat out a few words silently. "I'll settle the score with you next time." Qin Xian smiled lightly. Huan did not want her parents to notice anything, so she took her coat and walked out. It was a little cold outside, and when she was considering whether she should wear a coat, Enchanting had already started the car. The headlights came on, and the dark yard was instantly lit up. Chapter 4787. Huan didn't want her parents to notice anything, so she took her coat and walked out. It was a little cold outside. When she was considering whether she should wear a coat, Enchanting had already started the car. The headlights came on, and the dark yard was instantly lit up. She quickly got into the car. After hesitating for a moment, she sat next to him and slowly fastened her seat belt. Enchanting could have started the car directly, but he patiently waited for her to fasten her seat belt before slowly driving away. It was a little warm in the car. Qin Huan was indeed tired after flying for more than 10 hours. If it was in the past, she could have stayed here, but after that incident, she rarely stayed here. She would only stay here for less than a week a year. Most of the time, Enchanting would return to the Shen family during the Lunar New Year and the Mid-Autumn Festival. In the villa, when Enchanting wasn't there, her thoughts drifted a little, and then she felt a little tired and wanted to sleep. Maybe it was too comfortable. Obviously, the person beside him didn't want him to be too comfortable. The car window wound down, and Enchanting leisurely lit a cigarette and puffed out smoke. Although it was normal for men to smoke, and Enchanting usually smoked too, after Qin Huan suddenly woke up, she was sure that he did it on purpose. He woke her up on purpose. She coughed and silently took the coat to cover herself. She didn't say anything, but just looked out of the window with her face turned sideways. In the dark, only the lights on the roadside were on. They passed one light after another, and no one seemed to have any intention of talking. Huan thought that he hated her to death, so it was normal for him not to talk. And she didn't have the face to talk to him. In a blur, they arrived at her apartment. When the car stopped, she leaned forward a little, and the bad feeling made her think that she should have fallen asleep. She actually fell asleep in front of Enchanting. She hugged the coat a little embarrassedly, thanked him, and wanted to get out of the car. The car door was locked from the inside with a click. Huan's heart skipped a beat, and she turned her head. Enchanting. Enchanting looked ahead and lit a cigarette leisurely. How are things going with him? Huan understood that he was asking about Yi Xiangnan. She pursed her lips into a straight line, and after a while, she said very indifferently, "I'm all right. Both parents wanted to get engaged next month." Enchanting must have gotten the news, so he asked her. She didn't think that he would care about her now, but now that he asked, she didn't know how to answer, so she was so vague. In the car, it was very dark. Enchanting's side profile was not very clear, but the outline of his face was young and good-looking, and the smear of red between his fingers was very eye-catching. Huan sat motionless. Her body stiffened. If someone were to ask her what Enchanting meant to her, she would be stunned. She would say without hesitation that it was a very important person. It was the same for her and Enchanting. They originally had unlimited trust, but it was indeed destroyed by her own hands when she was 18 years old. After that day, she realized that Enchanting was not without pride and a bottom line. He asked her to choose, and she chose Yi Xiangnan. Later on, they went further and further away until they were like this today. After she finished speaking, she looked at him for a long time. Enchanting smoked quietly. To this day, their interaction was completely the way a man and a woman interacted. Brother Enchanting, brother, and the days when he took care of her seemed to be a long time ago. At this moment, there was a man and a woman sitting in the car. Moreover, there was a man and woman with a memory that could not be erased for one night. Chapter 4788. The atmosphere became even more tense. At the very least, Qin Yihuan felt very uncomfortable. She pursed her lips and after a while, she asked in a low voice, "How are you?" She paused as if she had thought of something. "How are you and Bai Anan?" Ting's finger that was smoking paused. Then he turned his head. Although it was very dark, he seemed to be very close to her. Yihuan seemed to be able to see his face, and his expression couldn't be good at the moment. But soon, he smiled faintly and said, "It's pretty good." Yihuan nodded and said, "That's good." Her hand was holding the handle of the car door, wanting to get out. "Are you afraid of me?" Ting said lightly. "Are you afraid that I will do something to you?" Yihuan shook her head, but he grabbed her hand with one hand. The heat from her palm made him frown. He gave up on what he wanted to say and sighed. "You have a fever." Yihuan was stunned. Ting had already put on his seatbelt again, and he leaned over to fasten it for her. Soon he started the car again. Yihuan came back to her senses. "Ting, I'm fine. It's just a low fever. I can take medicine at home." This meant that she had known that she was sick, but she insisted on coming back. Ting's expression became even worse, and he ignored her. In fact, he hadn't paid much attention to her in the past few years, and they rarely got along. If it hadn't been for Qin Xian, they probably wouldn't have had the chance to get along. Although they didn't say it explicitly, she knew that she and Yi Xiangnan were going to be engaged, and Ting and Bai Anan. She knew that Ting was never someone who would joke around. If he was dating Bai Anan, it meant that he really wanted to be with her. Bai Anan and Yi Xiangnan were cousins, and if it was true, she and Ting were still involved. Yihuan thought about it and looked at Ting. "I can do it." "Yes, you can. But then you will have a high fever and make a mess." There was no emotion in Ting's voice. Yihuan didn't say anything. She leaned against the back of the chair and gently pulled up her coat. After that, she probably fell asleep. Ting turned to look at her and rolled up the window. When they arrived at the hospital, she opened her eyes. "We're here." He looked at the time again. "Emergency treatment again?" Ting's voice was very calm. "Let's see how it goes first. If it doesn't work, you can stay for the night. Tomorrow, wait for Aunt Qinshan to come over and help you take a look." After he finished speaking, Yihuan stared at him warily. She pursed her lips and coughed. "I don't want a blood transfusion." When she was young, she often stumbled and fell, so blood transfusions were normal. But now that she had grown up, it seemed that Ting always had a reason for her to give a little more blood. She didn't want it at all. Ting looked at her and said calmly, "I'm not asking you to do a blood transfusion, but, Yihuan, you'd better." He did not say anything else. Yihuan didn't know that her body, or her poor physique, might affect her future fertility. Qinshan had told him, but not Yihuan. Ting also didn't understand why Qinshan told him. At this moment, he looked at Yihuan as he spoke. Yihuan looked at the night in front of the car and said calmly, "In fact, whether I'm good or not, it doesn't have much to do with you, does it?" Ting's voice was even calmer than hers. "Because your surname is Qin, so I care about you. Don't think too much about yourself and don't think about things that you shouldn't think about, Qin Yihuan, or the future Mrs. Yi." Chapter 4789. Yihuan's face was a little pale. She didn't know if it was because of her illness or his words. Indeed, he had never talked to her like this before. After that incident, they couldn't go back. Yihuan looked down. Ting, we get out of the car. I'll help you register for the emergency department." He sounded like he couldn't bear it anymore. Yihuan didn't understand. If he really couldn't bear it, why did he care about her? He could just ask a secretary to accompany her. But she still got out of the car obediently and followed behind Ting. Ting registered for her. He turned around and saw her holding her coat in her hands. He took it and put it on her without saying anything. Late at night, There weren't many people in the emergency department. There were only a few parents with their children on the drip. Most of them had a cold or a fever. Ting took her to see a doctor. It was a little over 38 degrees Celsius. Acute pneumonia. Huan was speechless. She only had a low fever. How did it become acute pneumonia? She bit her lip and didn't speak for a while. The doctor wrote out a prescription. You don't need to be hospitalized, but you need an infusion. I'll prescribe it for 3 days first. Huan nodded. Ting had already paid for the medicine. When he came back, he looked at her with the prescription in his hand. Go for an infusion. Huan gathered her coat. It's late. Tomorrow. Go to the ward. Ting didn't give her a chance to refute and went straight into the elevator. The Qin family had a VIP ward here and occupied the resources for many years. The reason was that both Huan and Qin Xian were frequent visitors to the hospital. Although they rarely came over these years, the ward was still maintained. Ting brought her over. After watching her lie down, he went to call the nurse. Huan was afraid of pain. She turned her head to the side when the needle was inserted. Ting happened to be in that direction. His eyes were slightly deep as he stared at her. Huan quickly turned her head to the side and didn't look at him, but her eyes still secretly turned red. The nurse knew her and said softly, Miss Qin, you'll be fine soon. There are 2 bottles of water tonight. She looked up and said with a smile, Is Mr. Shen still accompanying you? Qin Huan did not respond, but Ting nodded lightly. The nurse said and left. Only the 2 of them were left in the large ward, and the atmosphere became a little strange. Ting sat on the sofa beside the ward. He had no intention of talking to her. He closed his eyes and rested. Qin Huan couldn't help but say, There are nurses here. You can go back first. Ting didn't pay much attention to her at first. Then he opened his eyes and quietly stared at her for a while before saying in a low voice, Qin Huan, if I could, I wouldn't have stayed either. I'll send you back at dawn. You can ask your secretary to send you back or Yishangnan is fine. But don't talk now. Her lips moved, but she eventually closed her mouth. She lowered her eyes and quietly looked at the ceiling. After a long time, she couldn't help but say, Ting, that night. She was talking about the night of her 18th birthday. But just as she mentioned it, Ting's cold voice rang out. Don't mention what happened that night again. Actually, nothing had happened, but everything had happened. Ting's voice had a tinge of oppression. Qin Huan, it's been so many years. There's no need to mention it again. He seemed to be unreasonable, but she knew that it was because she was young and frivolous. She didn't know what was going on at that time. She had been possessed. The next day, when she saw Ting's incredulous gaze, she was ashamed for the first time. Chapter 4790. She didn't know how to explain it, but she felt that she was being unkind to him. There was a time when she suspected that she was not only dependent on Ting, but also possessive. That was why she did what she did. At that time, her relationship with Yishangnan was weak, but after that night, she still got together with Yishangnan. So that night was terrible for Ting. Almost all of his words were trampled under his feet. The girl he treasured so much could not like him, love him, or choose him, but she shouldn't be like that. Later, Ting started to date other girls, but most of them were not deep. One afternoon, when he came back to pick up a document, Huan happened to be sitting on the balcony. She saw Bai Anan sitting in his car, but she didn't get out. Bai Anan was sitting in the front passenger seat. When Ting got out of the car, he said a few words to her. Then, Bai Anan placed her hand on Ting's arm. Bai Anan smiled lightly, and Ting patted her hand back. To be honest, that was the first time Qin Huan saw him being gentle to a woman other than her. She didn't know that he could be gentle to other women. Now that she thought about it, it had been a few years since he and Bai Anan. She was curious why they weren't married even though they were a good match. Ting was already 31, and Bai Anan was 30, Qin Huan thought to herself. She couldn't help but look at Ting and say softly, I should say sorry. After she said that, Shunting's face darkened even more. He got up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. He stood there and looked out for a long time before he asked in a hoarse voice, "What's there to apologize for? Because you don't like me? Or because you seduced me that night?" Qin Yi Huan listened carefully. "You don't need to apologize for what happened that night. If you really want to apologize, you should apologize to Yi Xiangnan, right? Nothing really happened that night." But he hugged the 18-year-old Qin Yi Huan and kissed her. It was so close, and she was the one who initiated it. Until now, he still didn't understand why she did that. Was it a joke or a trick? All he knew was that early in the morning, she woke up by his side and picked up Yi Xiangnan's call. Then she apologized to him and said that she had to leave because Yi Xiangnan was waiting for her. When he had caught her, he had asked her why if she wanted to stay. She still only gave him 3 words. "I'm sorry." In this life, he never wanted to hear those 3 words from Qin Yi Huan's mouth again. He was still as cold as ever. Qin Yi Huan did not speak anymore. She sat up and bent her legs. After a long time, she whispered, "I'm getting engaged next month. Congratulations." Shunting's voice was monotonous. He probably already knew about it. Qin Yi Huan was still sitting there. After a long time, she looked at him. On Shunting, there was nothing but bleakness. She almost couldn't remember the brother Shunting of the past. She murmured her thanks very softly. After that, the 2 of them did not speak, mainly because they had nothing to say. Actually, they were not at the point where they would never see each other again. There was no deep love or hatred between them, but the strange thing was that there was such a deep gap between them that could never be healed. That night was long, but it also seemed to pass quickly. At 2 o'clock in the morning, after the 4 drip, Qin Yi Huan still fell asleep. Shunting still sat beside her and looked at her quietly. After the nurse cleaned up, she smiled at him. "Mr. Shun, why don't you sleep?" Chapter 4791. Updated quickly. It was a long night, but it seemed to pass by quickly. At 2 in the morning, Yi Huan was still so sleepy that she fell asleep. Shunting was still sitting beside her, watching her quietly. After the nurse was done, she smiled at him. "Mr. Shun, why aren't you sleeping?" The nurse had been here for a long time and remembered that Mr. Shun was always by Miss Qin's side when she was on the drip. They were very close and she always thought that they were a couple. But later on, she heard that Miss Qin's boyfriend was Yi Xiangnan from the Yi family. The nurses sighed. This was fate they couldn't compare. But it was strange that when Miss Qin was sick, it wasn't Yi Xiangnan who was by her side, but Mr. Shun. The nurse could tell that the 2 of them were much more distant. Since they were so distant, why were they fighting to do such a thing? Haha, men. The nurse went out and closed the door. Shunting dimmed the lights, still sitting there quietly. It wasn't that he wasn't sleepy, he just didn't want to sleep in front of her. At dawn, Qin Yi Huan opened her eyes. Shunting was still there, but his eyes were a little bloodshot. She sat up. "You haven't left yet?" Shunting's eyes darkened a little. Then he said calmly, "I'll send you back later." Yi Huan nodded. He sat there without moving, as though he had something to say. She looked up. Shunting suddenly said, "I'll move out. You can move back to the villa." Yi Huan asked almost instinctively, "Is it inconvenient? Are you getting married or cohabiting?" "Neither." Shunting's voice turned cold. "I just think it's more convenient for you to live at home." "So that was the reason." Yi Huan shook her head. "It's fine, I can take care of myself. Besides, it's too sudden for you to move out." Shunting looked at her for a while, then smiled faintly. "That's true, you're getting engaged soon. It's not convenient." She hadn't expected him to throw those words back at her. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything in the end. Shunting stood up and said, "I'll send you back. Come over in the afternoon and tomorrow, I'll let your secretary know." Yi Huan nodded, lifted the blanket, and put on her coat. After a night's rest, she felt much better. When they walked out together, the nurses looked around curiously. Sitting in the car again, Yi Huan accidentally discovered that it was already 9 o'clock. Shinting seemed to have a meeting this morning. She bit her lower lip and said, I'll take a taxi back. You go to the company for a meeting. I pushed it back. His voice was still very calm, and then he started the car. While he was driving, he received a few calls from Secretary Wang. They were all important business matters, and he only said a few words. However, there was one call that was different. It was from Bai Anan. Shinting's voice was not only businesslike, but there was also a hint of gentleness in it. It seemed to be about dinner, but Shinting rejected it, saying that he had to work overtime at night. Overtime, overtime, all he has in his mind is overtime. Yihuan made a face at the side. No wonder he couldn't find a wife until now. She felt that it might have something to do with her, but most of it should be because he was a workaholic. It had been so many years since that incident, and now Shinting was a diamond bachelor in B City. All the unmarried women in B City wanted to marry him. With that thought, the guilt in Yihuan's heart lessened a little. She even mustered up her courage and said, Are you that busy? After asking, she regretted it. Chapter 4792. She regretted her question as soon as she asked it. After a long while, Shinting finally said, I thought you wouldn't want me to be with Bai Anan. After all, if that's the case, we'll see each other all the time, right? Yihuan tilted her head and scratched her hair. Shinting, can we not be like this? We can actually get along peacefully. Nothing happened that night, right? Just as she finished speaking, the car came to a screeching halt. Yihuan's body leaned forward and she felt dizzy from the impact. Fortunately, there weren't many cars on the road in the morning, but it was still very dangerous for him to suddenly brake like that. Yihuan tilted her head and couldn't help but say, Shinting! He looked ahead for a long time before slowly turning his head to look at her. His voice was very soft. Even if something happened between us, the result would be the same, wouldn't it? This time, there was a hint of mockery in his tone. Perhaps she had stirred up all his anger. Yihuan shut up and leaned against the back of the seat. She said softly, I don't want to argue with you and I don't have the energy to. Shinting, isn't it better to call a truce? Don't you feel tired? If you think it's too much, I'll get out, she said softly. Shinting locked the car from the inside again and started the car, driving all the way to her apartment. Yihuan got out of the car and felt a little dizzy. She glanced at Shinting, indicating for him to drive carefully. Shinting didn't even look at her and slid the car into the driveway. Yihuan watched the car drive away before returning to her apartment. It was about 160 square meters and was very spacious for one person to live in. She never turned on the stove and ate out most of the time. Her work meals were delivered from the villa. She had always thought that it was her parents' arrangement, but she didn't object much. At this moment, her stomach was empty. She opened the fridge and only found milk. It was ice cold. She shook it twice and gave up. She called the secretary to order breakfast for her. After breakfast, she took a shower and wanted to call Yi Xiangnan. However, she gave up when she thought that he wasn't in the country and it was the middle of the night. Lying on the bed, he felt a little sleepy, probably because he didn't sleep well last night. Once she closed her eyes, she could feel Shinting's gaze on her. It would be strange if she could sleep well like this. Now that he had arrived at his own place, he could finally relax and slowly fell asleep. When she woke up, it was already 4 in the afternoon. The phone kept ringing. Yihuan buried her face in the pillow and answered the call. She thought it was Yi Xiangnan, so she mumbled, Brother Xiangnan? But the voice on the other side was very familiar. It was Shinting. The hospital called and said that you didn't go to the infusion. Shinting's voice was definitely not pleasant. Yihuan was a little embarrassed. She sat up and said, I just woke up. I'll go in a moment. I'm downstairs. Shinting's voice was slightly cold. Huh? Yihuan was surprised. After a while, she whispered, I can drive myself. The hospital contacted me. His voice was even colder. Yihuan knew that she couldn't avoid it, so she scratched her hair again. Then wait for me. She grabbed her coat, casually packed up and went downstairs. When she got to the car, it was very warm inside. She gently breathed out. It was a little cold outside. It rained. Enchanting's voice was a little hoarse. As he said that, he took a cup of milk tea out of nowhere and handed it to her. Chapter 4793. Yuan was stunned. For me, because he didn't let her drink these before, he would always make fruit tea for her at home. Enchanting didn't answer her and started the car. Yuan took a sip and felt her whole body warm up. It was so comfortable that she even suspected that she wasn't sick at all. She sighed contentedly and asked Enchanting, "Oh yeah, drop me off at the hospital. If you're free. Didn't you have an appointment with Bai Anan for dinner?" Enchanting held the steering wheel and said calmly, "She's busy." Oh. Yuan didn't say anything else. She thought that after today, she would definitely go to the hospital afternoon tomorrow. That way she wouldn't bump into Enchanting. She thought to herself but didn't say anything. She just took a sip of the milk tea. She stayed in the hospital for 2 hours and it was already dark when she came out. Yuan got into the car and curled up in the seat. "Thank you." Enchanting didn't say anything and just drove. Yuan was hungry. She was planning to ask the secretary to order a nutritious meal. She was starving. However, Enchanting didn't drive to her apartment. Instead, he parked in front of a vegetarian restaurant. Yuan's eyes widened. Didn't he not have time to eat? Enchanting unbuckled his seatbelt. "Don't eat too much when you're sick. Get out of the car. The vegetarian food here is good." Yuan followed him out of the car. "But I want to eat some meat." Enchanting glanced at her. "You can eat it when you're better." He walked in front and seemed to deliberately keep a distance from her. Yuan didn't follow him. She wrapped her coat and even a scarf around her to block the autumn wind. She didn't know that it was a vegetarian hot pot until she got inside. She got closer and whispered, "Is it contagious?" Enchanting glanced at her. "If it was contagious, I would have gotten it long ago." He picked a private room and sat down. The manager came over personally and brought a big piece of news. "Mr. Shen, Lawyer Bai is also here. He's in the private room next door." Enchanting didn't seem surprised. He played with the teacup in his hand and said, "No need." Yuan took off her scarf and coat. Her lips parted slightly in surprise. After a while, she said in a low voice, "Why don't you go over? I'll eat alone. I don't want to be infected." Enchanting stared at her for a while and said very slowly, "Are you uneasy? Are you afraid that Yi Xiangnan will misunderstand or feel guilty for stealing Bai Anan's boyfriend?" Hearing his words, Yuan couldn't say a word. What the hell was going on? Enchanting has said again, "It's not necessary. You've done more than this before. It's nothing. Now I'm just taking care of my family and having a meal with them. It's no big deal. Anan will not be so stingy." His words made it seem like Yuan had ulterior motives. She had no right to say anything else. So shut up. Fortunately, the manager was good at reading people's expressions. With one look, he knew something was wrong. President Shin's attitude was unusual. In the past, when he came over with Lawyer Bai, he wasn't like this. The manager didn't dare to say anything else and retreated for the waiter to serve the dishes. Because they were having hot pot, Enchanting was the one who did most of the work. Yuan only had to pick up the dishes. The food here was really good. After a while, she was eating until her nose was dripping with sweat. Enchanting glanced sideways without saying anything. Chapter 4794. On the other hand, he didn't eat much or fast. He ate very slowly. After so many years, Enchanting was already a rich young master among rich young masters. Every move he made was filled with nobility. His care for Yuan was just like what he said. When they had a meal together, he was considerate but not too intimate. Yuan felt a little different after eating for a while. She shook her head absent-mindedly. It had been so many years. Why did she sometimes feel that they were still like in the past? Now that they were so unfamiliar and distant, she didn't even have the face to call him Brother Enchanting. Because of this, she became more and more silent. In the end, The atmosphere became a little heavy. Shinting also didn't seem to want to change this situation. Later, Yi-Huan thought that maybe because they didn't need to meet tomorrow, they didn't need to be polite anymore. He would always hate her. She didn't say anything. The vegetarian pot didn't taste as good as before. No one spoke until the end. Shinting watched her finish eating. He lit a cigarette as he walked to the door. "Wait for me at the door. I'll park the car over." Yi-Huan nodded. Then she watched him open the door and close it. She immediately put on her coat and scarf and followed him out. It was very lively outside, especially in the lobby. Smoke lingered in the air, and there was a kind of fireworks atmosphere. When Yi-Huan arrived at the door, she was surprised to find Bai Anan there. Shinting was talking to her. The two of them stood in front of the car together. Beside Bai Anan was Yi Hui. Of course, Yi-Huan knew that she was Yi Xiangnan's sister. This kind of scene didn't look good, and the atmosphere was also very confusing. However, when Bai Anan and Yi Hui saw her, they weren't surprised, and they didn't show any signs of unfriendliness. Yi Hui called out to her, and Bai Anan smiled. Shun Ting's back was facing her, but he turned around and glanced at her. "Get in the car." Yi-Huan didn't get into his car so naturally. Bai Anan was his girlfriend. Even if Shinting was from the Qin family, she couldn't act so righteously right now. Besides, there was still the disgraceful past of that night when she turned 18. So Yi-Huan still refused. "I'll take a taxi myself. You can send Auntie and then back." Then she coughed softly. "Sister and I'm sick, so Shinting sent me to the hospital." Even a fool would be able to discern such a deliberate explanation. Yi Hui pretended not to hear anything. Shinting frowned, but Bai Anan was still smiling faintly. "I drove here, and I still have to send Yi Hui off first, so I'll let Shinting send you off. Besides, patients still need to be taken care of." Yi-Huan did not know what Bai Anan was feeling when she said that. She only felt that it was inappropriate. While she was hesitating, Shinting had already opened the car door. "Get in." She had no other choice but to get in the car. After sitting in the car, Shinting didn't get in immediately. Instead, he said a few more words to Bai Anan. After he got in the car, Yi-Huan wanted to say something, but she was frozen by the expression on his face. Experience told her that it was best not to open her mouth. Otherwise, she would be asking for trouble. The current Shinting was no longer the Shinting of the past. He wouldn't dote on her, and he wouldn't grant her every request. And all of this was lost by herself. The car gradually drove further and further away. Yi Hui looked in the direction of the car and turned her head. Bai Anan sighed. "I know what you want to say, but don't say anything." "Yi Hui, it's not the first time I know that Shinting likes Yi-Huan." Chapter 47-95. Memorize. Yi Hui was a slender young lady. She couldn't help but retort, "But you don't have to wait for him like this. He's obviously waiting for Qin Yi-Huan. As long as my brother and she don't get married, Shinting won't give up. You saw it for yourself just now. Actually, Yi-Huan's intentions are very clear. She's rejecting him. She wants to be with you and Shinting, but..." Bai Anan raised her hand. "All right, I know what you're saying. But if I tell you that I've never even kissed Shinting, do you think I can still ask him to be loyal to me, physically and mentally?" Yi Hui's eyes widened at once, and then she stammered, Are you kidding? And then you can't be. How old are you? You're still playing with pure love. It seems. You've also been in love for several years. It's not that there aren't any. Bai Anan sighed. If he's not the right person, he won't be able to take that step. Or perhaps he wants to leave all that for the person he wants. Yi Hui, let me ask you, has your brother ever slept with Yi-Huan? Yi Hui swallowed a mouthful of saliva. How would I know? I'm telling you, no. Bai Anan said firmly, there's a problem between them. Xiangnan, it's not that he doesn't like Yi-Huan, but there's something holding him back. Maybe even he doesn't know it. Yi Hui's expression became even stranger. Mizanin, how did you know? Bai Anan lowered her eyes. People who love each other aren't like that. If they loved each other, they would have gotten married long ago and would not have dragged it until now. Recently, Xiangnan seemed to have something on his mind. My brother is already 30 years old. He should have a son a long time ago. Yihuan isn't young either. There must be something fishy about the delay. Is it my brother's problem? But I don't think Yihuan is in a hurry. She has never urged my brother. Is it really okay for them to only see each other a few times a year? Yihui thought about it carefully and said, "Oh." Bai Anan sighed again. "That's why I'm cannon fodder. And I'm willing to do it." She clearly knew that there would be no results, yet she was still willing to put on an act. She had tried dating Enchanting before, but it was only for a short while. Soon, she realized that they were not suitable for each other. She said that to save some face for herself. The truth was that he was not interested in her. All these years, the occasional meal they had was mostly for work. After all, she was a top lawyer and a specially hired lawyer for King Group. She was very important. It was normal for Enchanting to accompany such an important person for a few meals. He also let the tabloids write nonsense and never corrected them. In the beginning, Bai Anan thought that she still had a chance. But after a year or two, Enchanting became colder and colder towards Qin Yihuan. So, she felt that she no longer had a chance. If he didn't care about that person, he wouldn't be so cold. After all, he was raised by the Qin family. No matter what, they should maintain a certain degree of harmony, right? Unless there was only one possibility. Enchanting was arguing with Qin Yihuan. A mature man like him would only argue with the girl he liked. Perhaps he was waiting. He was arguing while waiting for Yihuan to give up, waiting for Yihuan to turn back. But Bai Anan felt that they were in love. All these years, Yi Xiangnan had nothing to do with it. Bai Anan had nothing to do with her. Actually, Enchanting was very black-bellied, and Qin Yihuan had always been the one being controlled. Chapter 4796. Updated quickly, but so what? Enchanting and Qin Yihuan weren't going to talk about it anymore. Bai Anan and Yi Xiangnan were also doing the same. It wasn't that they didn't want to give up, it was just that they couldn't find a reason to give up. As for the engagement next month, Bai Anan thought about it. So what if they were engaged? Neither of them had any intention of getting married. So what if the emperor wasn't anxious? On the other side, Enchanting was driving. Qin Yihuan was still sitting beside him. Halfway through the car, she couldn't help but ask, "Enchanting, is there really no problem?" Enchanting looked ahead and said calmly, "What's the problem?" Qin Yihuan pursed her lips. "Bai Anan." There was a red light ahead. Enchanting stopped the car and turned to look at Yihuan. Yihuan didn't say anything. After a long time, Enchanting said, "You're thinking too much." She didn't say anything and just sat there quietly. After the red light, it started raining. The rain was quite heavy. The windshield wipers brushed against the front windshield. Qin Yihuan could tell that she was a little lost in thought. Neither of them said anything and they arrived at her apartment in the rain. The car didn't enter the underground garage and the rain was quite heavy. Yihuan sat in the car and looked out. She pursed her lips and was about to open the car door when Enchanting got out of the car and took an umbrella from the trunk. He held the umbrella with one hand and opened the car door with the other. "Get out." Yihuan was fine, but Enchanting's body was wet. Yihuan felt quite apologetic. In front of the elevator, she looked at him. "Go to my place and wipe yourself. Otherwise you'll catch a cold." "No need." Enchanting's voice was so cold that it was a little unreasonable. He quickly went out and got into the car. Yihuan looked at him in a daze. When the car lights came on, he would probably leave soon. At this moment, Enchanting happened to look over. Yihuan was shocked. She ran into the elevator as if she were running for her life. When the doors closed, her heart was still beating. Then, she gently caressed her chest and bit her lip until she reached the floor where she lived. After entering the house, she took off her coat and took a hot shower. After changing into a set of home clothes, she made a cup of hot milk. Yihuan had long passed the age of drinking milk, but she still liked to drink milk powder. This was a secret that not many people knew. On such an autumn night, it was very comfortable to drink. At the same time, he turned on the TV and picked a Korean drama. After a while, he suddenly thought of Enchanting. He should have left. Qin Huan thought for a moment, then suddenly ran to the French window and looked down. There was another car parked downstairs. She recognized it as Enchanting's car. Qin Huan was stunned for a moment. Then she took her coat and went downstairs. The person downstairs was indeed Enchanting. He was sitting in the car with the window down so she could see that his clothes seemed to be wet. "Is it broken?" she asked him. Enchanting tilted his head and glanced at her. Then he continued to start the car, but the engine turned off. And the rain was getting heavier. It didn't seem like an autumn rain at all, but more like a storm. He asked the driver to pick him up. It was so late and it was raining heavily. So, Huan said in a low voice, "Do you want to go up and take a shower? Otherwise you'll get sick." Enchanting sat for about half a minute before opening the door and getting out. He didn't even bring an umbrella. Anyway, his clothes were all wet. When entering the elevator, Huan pressed the button a little embarrassedly. She felt that her heart was beating faster than before. Chapter 47-97. 1 second to remember. They were actually the closest and most familiar family. Apart from that night, they should have been the calmest. But after that night, everything changed. She had mixed feelings. Enchanting seemed to see through her and said calmly, "I'll stay in the car for the night." No need." She looked down. "Stay at my place. I have 3 rooms." Enchanting didn't object anymore until the elevator stopped. Huan opened the door of the apartment. "Come in." This was also Enchanting's first time here. The entire apartment was beige. It was simple, elegant, and comfortable. He noticed that there were male slippers in the room, but they looked brand new. Huan explained, "They've always been here, but no one has used them before. There are also bathrobes here. You can go to the guest room first. I'll get them for you." Enchanting stared at her after she said that. His gaze was slightly unpredictable. Huan didn't know what he meant and couldn't say a word for a long time, but Enchanting said thank you in the end. Huan forced a smile and turned to go to her bedroom. It took her about 5 minutes to find a male bathrobe. It was brand new. When she moved here, she bought 2 sets, a couple's set. Immunin had never been here before, so it was brand new. She tugged at her clothes uneasily and thought that most bathrobes were similar. Enchanting shouldn't be able to tell, right? After mentally preparing herself, she quickly went to the guest room. She opened the door and called out to Enchanting. Then she was stunned. When she came back to her senses, Enchanting had already turned his head and looked at her. And on the bed was the black shirt he had taken off. Enchanting had a good figure. He was the type that looked slim when dressed and muscular when undressed. His muscles weren't exaggerated but just right. She didn't see him working out, but she clearly saw his six-pack just now. "I'll leave the clothes here. Go to bed early after your shower." Huan's voice was very soft and then she ran away. Enchanting was still looking in the direction where she left. The color of his eyes deepened and she couldn't see his emotions. After a long time, he picked up the clothes and looked down at them. It was very new, and if he was not mistaken, it was the same style as the one she was wearing. Enchanting's Adam's apple couldn't help but roll. He casually went into the bathroom to take a shower and change into his bathrobe. The simple white bathrobe looked especially good on him. Perhaps it was because he was young and slender, but his face looked good, especially his straight legs. It was not Enchanting's sleeping time at this time. He was used to sleeping at 1 o'clock at night. Walking out of the guest room, he wanted to make himself a cup of coffee. As soon as he walked out, he saw Huan sitting on the sofa with a pillow in her hands. She was watching a Korean drama while wiping away her snot. Enchanting went over. "Did you catch a cold?" "Huh?" Huan was startled. She heard a voice beside her ear. She turned her head and accidentally brushed her lips against Enchanting's face. Enchanting narrowed his eyes and quietly took a few steps back, avoiding the subtle atmosphere. After a short moment of silence, both of them seemed to want to ignore this small accident, especially Huan, who bit her lips. You're watching Korean dramas. You're crying? He actually asked an extra question. It was already very rare for him to not speak to her in the past few years. Hwan's voice was a little soft. I'm not crying. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.